Since 2018, we've seen red states that had already been pushing laws designed to cut down abortion access begin to pursue even more aggressive policies. Most of these laws are known as heartbeat legislation, which would ban abortion after doctors can detect the fetus's heartbeat. This can be a problem for pregnant women because a lot of people won't find out that they're pregnant until after these 6 weeks. In Louisiana, Mississippi, and Ohio, for instance, abortion will be banned as soon as the fetus's heartbeat can be detected, not even if the woman is a victim of rape or incest. An abortion would only be permitted to save the mother's life if she'll be seriously injured in the birth or if the fetuses won't survive after birth. In Georgia, abortion would be banned after a heartbeat is detected as well, although there would be an exception for rape or incest survivors. However, women would need to have filed an official police report about their assault. In Missouri, abortions would be cut off after 8 weeks of pregnancy unless the mother is in danger of dying or being seriously and permanently injured during the birth. It wouldn't offer any exceptions for rape or incest. The strictest law of all is in Alabama, which would virtually ban abortion. The procedure would only be permitted if it would prevent a serious health risk to the mother or if the fetus is likely to die soon after birth or to be stillborn. These laws don't seem like they'll stand up in court because of Roe v. Wade, which protects abortion up until the point of viability, which is usually put at around 24 weeks of pregnancy. Judges have rejected the legislation in state after state, but some conservative lawmakers seem to hope that one of the cases will make it to the Supreme Court and potentially lead to limitations on abortion access.
Hello, everyone. You are live with King Sigma on this Tuesday, February 25th afternoon. Thanks for joining me for this lunch break special. Today, I kind of wanted to chime in on an ongoing conversation in this very political election 2020 year. Something that I've been saying for the last few uploads is that over the course of the next 6 to 9 months, I'll be, giving my opinion, providing primary documentation, and taking input from the audience on, the 10 to 15 major third rail political issues. And obviously, the question of eugenics, abortion, and stagnating demographics, especially among Native Black Americans, is something that will be discussed more and more. The reason I decided to do it this afternoon is because later tonight, we have a Democratic debate taking place in South Carolina. So what happens, as you all know, every 4 years, you get these national politicians. They come around to the Black jurisdictions across the 50 states of the United States. And they go to the churches, they go to the barber shops, they go to the hair salons. I guess they even go to the record league now. And they just do a lot of pandering. So with the focus being on the Black American majority, who, as we all know, for the last 60 years, most of their vote has gone to the Democrats, and they've gotten very little for it. And in particular, Black men have gotten really nothing. So this question of eugenics and breeding out and abortion keeps coming up. But shout out to Big Poke Dog, says salute. Appreciate you, bro. Salute to you as well. But this narrative that I kind of been seeing going around. So like every time free thinking Black men come up with these counter narratives to one issue, those that are opposed to Black men come up with another issue. So now somehow there's this conversation about breeding out. Yes, literally. So as you know, Native Black Americans are mostly a homebred population here in the United States, a social engineering experiment for the benefit of the greater white planter class and the owners of the means of production class. So that's just a fact. So now there's this idea of like a reverse breeding out. So a lot of people are saying that somehow Black men are playing a role in lowering the population numbers of Native Black American people, which, when you actually start looking at the documentation on demographics, that's not true. But what is true is that one of the biggest policies to be approved over the last 50 years or so has been Roe v. Wade. That has played a huge role in the actual breeding out of the Native Black American population over the last 50 years or so. So I'm looking at some of this data and I find a bunch of reports, but one of the reports that stood out to me the most was one called The Effects of Abortion on the Black Community. Now, this report was presented to the House of Representatives in June of 2015. Now, at that time, the president of the United States was Barack Obama and the vice president was Joe Biden. And they were in their last year of the second term for Barack Obama. And the U.S. Senate was under the control of the Republicans, and also the U.S. House was under the control of the Republicans. And the speaker at that time was John Boehner, who would be replaced that fall by Wisconsin Representative Paul Ryan. So during that year, they were having a bunch of these think tanks policy experts come in to discuss this issue of Roe v. Wade, demographics, with the upcoming U.S. Census, right around the corner at that time. Now, here we are in 2020, and we're in the year of the U.S. Census. So most of us will start receiving our U.S. Census forms sometime in April or May. And I got to thinking about this whole demographics question because on Sunday, March 1st, noon Central, I'll be holding like a very hyped panel discussing the splintering of Black America over the last 60 years based on a review of the Washington Post editor and Pulitzer Prize winner, Eugene Robinson's best-selling book, Disintegration. And I just thought, wow, this is a great time to discuss that book 10 years later. So stay tuned for that. But what I've been doing over the last 2 weeks is I've been uploading conversations that relate to that and that start to paint a much, much different picture than the one that's been promoted by the mainstream media, and definitely the Black misanders. They've painted one picture, but when you actually start really just peeling back different policies since just 1965, 1970 era, you see that Black men especially have been left out of the conversation, but the reality of this split Black American Native population demographic becomes more and more clear. And boy, 2020, when this census comes out, it is going to blow the top off of a lot of things, because I was looking through the numbers, right? So if you look at 1970, 1990, and the 2010 census, and I wanted to start at 1970 because obviously, as you know, like birth control, Roe v. Wade all happened around the 70s. That was at the peak of the second wave of feminism, right? And that was kind of what I talked about in my last live stream, was about the roots of the shredding of the Black sexual contract. And I talked about that with the Combahee River Collective Black feminist movement in 1978 and their own Declaration of Independence that they released in 1978. So I'm going through all this feminist literature from the 70s, and I really haven't focused much on the fourth wave, which is really, the social media Me Too. Now you have obviously Weinstein was acquitted of less charges yesterday or whatever, but that's the fourth wave. And I feel that because we're so close to that, we mostly know what's going on with the fourth wave. Blatant misandry, gender entitlements for women, and a hatred of men being actually promoted by the social institution of America. We all know that because we're in 2020. That's where we're at with the fourth wave right now. But what a lot of us that were born in the 80s and 90s don't know about is this: what was going on with the second wave feminists and how they are the female boomers of today and the remaining silence of today, and how so much of their literature and so much of their policy and lobbying is what created the situation that we have today. So when you go back and you look at a lot of this birth control and the abortion and Planned Parenthood, and you start comparing it to the numbers. So when you stop at 1970, right? When you start at 1970, the Native Black American population was about 22 to 23 million. That was around 11%. Now, between 1970 and 1990, something very critical in America happened in relations to Native Black Americans and the rest of America. The immigration laws became very liberalized, right? So prior to 1965, there were strict restrictions on immigration from non-European countries. And I'm making that distinction because there was always a very welcoming attitude towards those coming from Europe countries. But prior to 1965, there was real strict restrictions on Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, and Latin America. But along with the Civil Rights Act, and I've talked before about how we don't talk enough about the role that the Cold War played in forcing the end of Jim Crow apartheid. So because of the way that Russia, China, and Cuba were hammering the America's image as this global democratic superhero, there was a lot of pressure on them to improve their domestic situation in regards to, anti-Black racism and their discrimination against those from Black dominated countries and Latino and Asian countries. That's what started to happen in the late 60s and late 70s. We don't talk about that, but that is the reality. And that's why I'm kind of focusing on that 70s period. So along with that, so with this new open borders policy that really began in the late 60s and the 70s, we started to see like an influx of people from these different countries that have been banned. But it was between 1970 and 1990 that we saw the biggest growth in the Black foreign-born population coming from Africa and the Caribbean. And that's substantially important to Black Americans because in terms of the census, we've always been grouped into one group, even along with biracials. And that's something that Eugene Robinson was trying to point out as well. So when you look at 1970, the Native Black population was about 23 million, 11%. But then it grew slightly by a percentage to 30 million at 12.1%. But that was because of the growth of the African and the Caribbean population. And from 1990 to 2010, the population grew to just about 35.6% for Black Americans. That's what they said in 2010. And that's about 12.3%. So in our last US census, the Native Black American population is somewhere around 36 to 37 million. But when you actually break it down and you start looking at the population of biracials, and then you look at the population of these foreign-born Blacks that are in their first or second generation, they are somewhere around like 4 to 5 million in terms of those coming from Africa or the Caribbean. And the biracial population in America is around 3%. So that's around 7 million biracials. So just splitting it down and say half of these are those that call themselves Black, that puts them at about 3 million or so. So you're talking about a population of between 7 to 8 million of quote unquote Black people that are not native born Blacks being put in with our population. And so when you actually start to look at that number, you come to find out if you remove the biracials and you remove the foreign born Blacks or the second generation Blacks, or those even just since the 1965 Immigration Act amendments, the Black Native American population is about 10%. Yeah, it's actually about 10%. So as I started thinking about what's coming for the 2020 census, because remember, I'm giving you the data from 2010. We won't even have the 2020 data until December. And I started thinking, okay, so even just looking at it, just without even talking about the eugenics and the abortion aspect, you're already, when you separate the biracials, which they're becoming more and more vocal, biracial people of saying that we're our own class, which Meghan Markle wrote a famous article in Elle magazine where she said that I'm not Black, I'm a biracial. And I, as a Black man, I don't have a right to tell someone else what they identify as. I'm cool. Hey, you're biracial. Fine. And she wrote that article, I believe, like back in 2016 or something like that. So I'm hearing more and more of these biracials who have a Black or other parent that are calling themselves biracials. They're saying that they're not Black. So they will become a more outspoken group as we go over this decade. And we'll know that for sure in the 2030 census as well. So then when you look at the foreign-born Blacks being between 4 and 5 million, their numbers now are being stopped by Donald Trump because obviously he just passed his second version of the travel ban, and that included a lot of African countries on there. I know I saw like Nigeria on that list, Eritrea was on that list. He already had Somalia on the list before, Sudan. So he's already begun the process of slowing down immigration, especially from African countries. There was a couple Middle Eastern countries and like a couple Asian countries as well. So that number is about to be put on pause, at least for this year. And if Trump gets a second term, it's definitely going to be put on pause. So then I started thinking about the abortion thing and the illegal immigration thing, right? So right now, they said in the last version of the census does this thing where they have their official census, and then they kind of like try to track the growth of the population before the next census. And the last time they did like a partial informal report, it said that the US population was around 327 million. And so if you actually looked at the illegal immigrants, they say there's about 16 million of them in America right now. And that has begun to slow as the immigration laws have become to be enforced or whatever. If you took the 16 million illegal immigrants that came into America since that period that we're talking about, since 1970, then you would get the population down to like 311 million, right? And I'm like, okay, so you got, if you remove this illegal immigration, which cost American taxpayers, you and I, about 137 to 140 billion dollars per year in welfare aid that goes to these illegal immigrants. I'm like, man, the Black American voter has been completely shafted over the last 50 years, man. I'm talking about completely shafted. So then I'm looking at the abortion numbers, and that's why I'm going to get into this report. So there's been barely any growth in the Black American population, all taken together with biracials and with the foreign-born blacks. But when you remove the foreign-born blacks, which is being done by the grassroots Black Americans that are fighting to make the distinction between the native-born Black American and the foreign-born, which is already happening right now, our numbers are actually lower than they were in 1970. Now, that's going to come as a surprise to many people, because the argument that you've been hearing for the last 12 years from many people, they've just said that, well, it's been stagnant and it's just stood at around 11 to 12%. That's not true. The native Black American population numbers have actually dropped when you take out biracials and you take out foreign-born blacks. Our numbers are more like 9.7 to 10%. That's where the abortion has played a critical role. Now, as I've told people before, my political view on abortion is that it should be paid for by the aborters and their advocates, and that I can accept first-term abortion, but I'm against abortion in the second and third terms. And I'm also against using abortion as a form of birth control. I think it's very irresponsible and it's malicious to do so, and a hint of evilness to use abortion as a form of birth control. So I don't know where that puts me. So I'm not a conservative and I'm not a liberal on the issue of abortion. But I was more concerned about the issue just from the standpoint of this argument about breeding out. So as I've said before, with this whole Black abortion thing, Black people have been right at the forefront. The Black woman has been at the forefront of abortion. She's overrepresented by, like, I believe, a factor of 4 compared to her numbers in the population. So as of 2020, looking at the numbers from 1973 to 2019, we're talking about just under 21 million Black fetuses aborted, bro. Just think about that number. Just under 21 million Black fetuses aborted since 1973. So if you would add that to our numbers, which based on when you remove the biracials and when you remove the foreign-born blacks, the native Black American actual number in the population is actually around 33 million, not the 37 and 38 million that you guys have been thinking. It's actually more like 33 million based on the numbers that I saw in the U.S. Census 2020. So the native Black American actual population numbers is around 33 million and about 10% of the population as of 2010. Now, remember, we had a lot of foreign-born blacks come in over the last 10 years, and we also had a big boom in biracial relationships and biracial births over the last 10 years as well. So the question becomes, if that biracial number was 3% in 2010 at around 6.8 million, I would not be surprised if that number is closer to 5%, and the foreign-born Black population is probably maybe even double. I'm just speculating here. So we're talking about that population of what Eugene Robinson calls the emergent class, which he breaks into 2 halves. Those that are foreign-born and those that are biracial, it was at around 7 million. I wouldn't be surprised if that number is more like 10 million when we get these new numbers in 2020. So I want to work through this little article with you guys because, again, it's very critical that we be research-based. And I say that because, I've talked a lot about how the Black man is the most alienated, the most marginalized, and the most envied. But there's actually power in that. And the reason that I believe that is because I've listened to a lot of the detractors of Black men, a lot of the misandrists against us. And, there's a common thread that runs true to all of them. And we saw that with the emasculation of Snoop Dogg. over the course of the last 2 weeks. But because you have individuals like Snoop Dogg that have lost their pride, that have been completely psychologically castrated, the world seems to believe that that represents the average black rank and file man. I disagree. So one of the common things that is said about us black men is that we don't read, we don't think for ourselves, everyone else thinks for us. And you know what's crazy? Those like Jada Pinkett, Suzanne King, and Gayle King actually they've been listening to this rhetoric and this propaganda for so long, they've actually begun to believe it. Not even knowing that we're at a time where the mainstream media is losing so much power. They're losing so much of their influence and power, but because you see these celebrities that you grew up with, we all grew up listening to Snoop Dogg and these people as children. But a lot has changed since we were in preschool and all that, man. The last 20 years has been a tremendous change in the way that information is spread across the world now. So I was thinking about what really makes journalism important. And in my research, I came to a conclusion that the thing that makes journalism important is like the way, the speed and the accuracy and the style of how we deliver information to other people. That's all media is, bro. Speed, accuracy, and delivery of information to other people. And what has happened is that wall between the elite media and the consumers of the news and information has been completely torn down in this information age. And I want to keep drilling this home to you brothers that you have power, man. You have influence because we're in the age of the consumer producer now. And we have all the same tools that they have. And I'm going to use, just like I did in a live stream, go back to their primary documents. I'm very much about finding primary documents as my source and to build the conversation from there. And we're going to work through one of the primary documents that was presented to the 114th U.S. Congress in June 2015. And that's where we build our conversation from. We're not doing this emotional conversation going forward in this space, at least. We're not doing it, man. Because I found that that's like a dark hole that you can never get out of. When you put your emotions before the logic and the facts, you fall into a hole that the enemies of black men love to get you into. But when you actually build from the standpoint of academia, academia is all about building from the primary sources, then having a discussion. So that's just kind of my thoughts about how much clout that the media has. Many of you still believe that the media has all this power and influence. Yes, it is true that they do have the money. Oh, they got so much money. But for them, money is not enough. It's about the power to influence and the controlled thinking. So that's where it's been dispersed. The power to control and influence has been dispersed widely now. Any man, woman, or even children with Wi-Fi can join in on the discussion. I don't need a poll to tell me that Joe Biden was going to lose. All the polls that the mainstream media was pushing over the last year told you that Joe Biden had like a 30% lead over all the contenders for the Democratic nomination. They told you that up until the very day before the Iowa caucus, they were still spreading that lie that Joe Biden had like this 30-point lead. And I tracked many of the polls in my journal over the course of the last year. So I just wanted, before I get into this this document, I just wanted to give you guys a couple polls that was put out there by the same mainstream media that you all think has all this power and influence just because they have celebrities that you looked up to as a child, which now you don't look up to no more. You don't look up to these celebrities no more. Now that you've seen the way that Dwayne Wade has emasculated himself, now that you've seen the way that Snoop Dogg got on stage and was chastised by 3 generations of black misandries, a millennial, a Gen Xer, and a boomer in front of millions of people, you don't look up to Snoop Dogg no more. He's not even important no more. He's done, finished. And he's no representative of black men. When he said what he said about Gayle King, he was 100% right. And now they've sent that man on a 2-week apology tour, and ain't none of those women apologize for their misandry. So when you look at some of the things that was being put out by the mainstream media, ABC News, The Economist, CNN, here's a poll that they had back in December 31st, 2019. Now, for you guys that have not been following the Democratic nomination, Biden has lost the first 3 primaries. No president in the United States, but there were only like 2 in the last 70 years that won a nomination that didn't win Iowa and New Hampshire. But I don't think none has ever lost all 3 of the first primaries and ever got nominated. Back in December 31st, 2019, there was a Morning Consult poll. Now, these are all the #1 polls in America. They had Biden at 32%. They had Sanders at 21%, Elizabeth Warren at 14%, Buttigieg at 8%, and Michael Bloomberg at 6%. That was on December 31st, 2019. Now we fast forward to right before the Iowa caucus. They had Biden up until January 10th. They were saying Biden was in the South Carolina, they had him at 36%, in Nevada at 23%, Wisconsin 23%, and Des Moines at 25%. They had Warren at 17%, Buttigieg at 16% in one of these polls from Des Moines Register. Now, fast forward to the New Hampshire poll. Now, remember, they actually stole Iowa and said it was almost like a tie between Bernie Sanders and Buttigieg. But that Iowa caucus was such a disaster that they don't even really count it. But then Bernie Sanders went on to win the New Hampshire primary easily. And then he had a straight blowout this Saturday of almost 50% in Nevada. And Nevada is much more representative of the voting blocks of urban America. That's what has him very afraid of that guy. And we'll definitely have a conversation about Bernie Sanders as he as this thing moves forward versus Donald Trump and his brand of socialism versus Trump's brand of nationalism, capitalism. That's going to be a good conversation. I look forward to actually seeing that race because it's such a polarizing political theater. So then we had, like in New Hampshire, they had Biden at 27%, Bernie Sanders at 20%, and Warren at 19%, and Buttigieg at 7%. So that was the poll that you had all the way on January 17th, okay? They had Biden at almost 30%. Biden has gotten his butt kicked in all 3 of the first primaries, man. I think he got like 4th place in one of these caucuses, 5th place in another, and in Nevada, I think he got like 4th place. Now they're saying that he's going to win South Carolina. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, he's been telling himself, and these mainstream Democrats have been saying that Black people support Joe Biden. And I'm like, what? So what it's showing me is that the mainstream in corporate America has not only lost its influence over the minds of the rank and file Americans overall, but they're so out of touch of what's going on in Black America. So out of touch. And again, one of the reasons that they think that Black men don't think for ourselves, we don't research, we don't read. This is a big stereotype about us Black men. They really believe it. So I think they're in for a shocker because many Black men don't have any interest in the Republicans or the Democrats, actually. But the biggest shock is to the Democrats because they're the ones that need Black men to stay on board with them. But they're not offering you anything. So that's something I just want to show it you just to prove that you guys are giving way too much credit to corporate America. You're giving way too much credit to the corporate media. They've lost their way. They've lost their influence. And if you actually look into people that study the journalistic trends over the last 30 years, you find out that the leadership is very aware. They're very aware that they don't have the influence that they used to have. And I wanted to kind of bring up this article to show you what I'm talking about. And this might have missed a lot of people, but this happened just over the last 2 months. And it's happening at a higher rate. The amount of people that are being laid off from a lot of these publications. And it's actually the more the publication pushes like this misandrist culture, social justice warrior, and politically correct woke culture, the more likely that company is to go under. Because what it is, when you have to compete against people that are actually giving authentic truth and raw opinions that are on ground level, you're going to have a hard time competing at the corporate level when you're so detached from the common person. So on the screen, I have BuzzFeed will cut its staff by 15% in major rounds of layoffs. That was this time last year. So I wanted to show you guys this because this was the first quarter of 2019. They were already doing 15%. But since then, they've had like 2 more rounds of layoffs at BuzzFeed. For those that know about like the social justice warrior, cancel culture, misandry culture, it's been created by a lot of these webazines like BuzzFeed. And what happened is that 2019, there was a big pushback by men across the American racial lines against this kind of anti-male rhetoric, these kind of articles against men, not giving men a voice, trying to silence men. So right here it says that it's a dark day to work in media. On the heels of news that TechCrunch parent company Verizon Media Group, formerly Oath, will lay off roughly 800 workers, BuzzFeed has announced its own substantial staffing cuts, and though they were anticipated, Gannett also made substantial cuts to newsrooms around the U.S. on Wednesday. In a memo to employees, BuzzFeed CEO explained that the layoffs will hit next week, reducing its workforce by 15% or about 250 positions. See that, people? So the same people over the last decade that have been at the vanguard of pushing these misinterest narratives in the corporate media, they're actually all being fired now. And, you know, shout out to everyone in the chat, man. I appreciate y'all dropping in. So Black Torch was saying that whole thing about Planet Fitness. Yeah, the Planet Fitness question brings up a lot of issues of the First Amendment and violation of civil rights. If Little Boosie is smart, he would actually be talking to his attorney to find out, were my civil rights violated when he was kicked out of Planet Fitness for not anything that he did on the premise, but because he was in his private life, he made a comment, you exercise his political rights. So the question becomes, can a person be banned from a public facility that might be privately owned, might be publicly owned, because of something that they said on the internet that had nothing to do with that place? So we are entering a decade of insanity, bro. The fact that Little Boosie was barred from Planet Fitness because of something that he said in a political realm that's like a freedom of speech issue. So do you not have the right to speak in your private life about politics anymore? So are we at the point now where Planet Fitness can say that if you're a Republican or an independent or a libertarian or a Green Party, you can't be a member of our club? If that's where we're at, that flies in the face of the Civil Rights Act. That flies in the face of First Amendment rights. So we're entering a very crazy period of time. And what's ironic is that at the time that Planet Fitness is doing what it's doing, conservative First Amendment type people are actually being put on the courts. Donald Trump has gotten more federal judge appointees than any president in the last 50 years. He's almost at 200 appointees. A quarter of all federal judges now have been appointed by Donald Trump. That's not counting those that were already there because of Bush 1 and Bush 2 that's still there. So for all we know, half of all the judges on the federal benches might be conservative-leaning, pro-Constitution judges. So what's going to happen as these things happen against men for coming out and protecting themselves, these cases are going to start to work themselves to the court. Kind of like what happened with Sargon of Akkad and the black female that he had the issue with, where she took him to court and he won. So she ended up spending all this money on lawyers to try to stop his freedom of speech and censor him here on YouTube. And the decision came down last week and he actually won his case against her on freedom of speech grounds. So this is the deck. See, what has happened is that you've had like a generation of these weenies that have been raised with this sense of entitlement and emotion before logic, and they don't have a strong grounding in the Constitution. And they don't understand that just because you go to a university and your professor told you this or that, when you go to court, that professor is not going to be there in court with you paying your lawyer fees. That professor is, once you come out of their classroom, you're gone. So they done programmed you with this nonsense. You got to go out in the world and try to compete. That professor with tenure is getting paid off the taxpayer. He doesn't care, or she doesn't care what they teach you. But you're the one that's going to suffer the consequences of your miseducation. So that whole thing with Planet Fitness, if I'm Little Boosie, and again, I don't really have a lot of faith in these guys. They don't understand the law, because I already told you guys if Snoop was smart, the moment that Suzanne Rice possibly violated his rights as a private citizen, I would have had my lawyers out there. with a lawsuit that Monday, defamation of character, terroristic threats. I would have filed that. Even if I lost the case, I would have filed it, because she's sitting up there getting a fat check from Netflix on their board of directors right now. She was a former U.S. ambassador with possible still some kind of connection to the government. I would have told them I'm afraid for my life. I would have brought Netflix to task, but instead, this buffoon is sitting there on stage at the period red table talks with 3 generations of black misandrists apologizing. And this is supposed to be one of the hardest core rappers in the history of America. This is the alpha manhood, Snoop, being castigated on stage before millions, when not even knowing that he has a bigger following on his own personal social media than Jada Pinkett and all of these women do. They don't have no platform outside of corporate America. We have the audience. And if he would have stuck to his guns and showed some kind of backbone, he would have had the will of the people with him. But now the people want nothing to do with him, and they're discarding him, pushing him off stage. He's been castrated. He is not a representative of the rank and file, everyday black man, period. So I don't know. If I'm Little Boosie, I put in the lawsuit saying that my civil rights were violated by Planet Fitness. I'm suing them for at least $10 million because of the defamation and the emotional damage. Because think about it. That whole thing has been run through the media. So it can potentially harm him financially going forward. That's some Jim Crow type shit, man. What they did to Little Boosie. That's Jim Crow level, because he was discriminated against because he's a man and he's a black man and he has views that do not align with a specific organization. That's crazy. I mean, I haven't even ever heard these kind of things. And I guess that's where we're at now. And we're going to have these discussions. Is it a violation of your freedom of speech? Was his civil rights violated? If someone can tell you that you can't go to what is supposedly a public facility for everybody because you have political views that weren't even expressed on the grounds of the facility, man. So we are walking into some ugly, ugly court cases over this next decade, but it's beautiful at the same time, because that's what we have these spaces here for. We can easily follow these cases. We can easily have our open discussion about the cases, and we can all go through the Constitution and think about it. So we'll see what happens. But again, I don't have very much faith in Little Boosie. If he's anything like Snoop Dogg, these dudes think emotionally and not logically. If that happened to any kind of white celebrity, he would have been right there with his lawyer, bringing a lawsuit on Monday against Planet Fitness. So for any of you that follow that case, if you do hear anything that Little Boosie is bringing a lawsuit against Planet Fitness, please let me know, because I like reading those motions and kind of see what kind of argument that lawyer make. And we got to follow these things and stay up on it. Well, with that whole Rainbow Cake case, they said it was a violation of his freedom of his First Amendment rights. In that case, they violated his First Amendment rights based on his freedom of religion and his right to expression. So that's what happened in the Master P case situation. It was a violation of his First Amendment rights. So now the question becomes, is it a violation of Planet Fitness right to not have you in their facility? Or is it a violation of the Civil Rights Act that said that public accommodations have to be open to everyone? So I would have to look and see if Planet Fitness is privately owned or publicly owned. But now they've opened up a whole can of worms, because if they're now saying that you can discriminate based on someone's political views, well, the natural thing will become that now those that are against the alternative lifestyle will say, well, we're barring everyone of an alternative lifestyle from our private facilities. See, this is the road that we're about to go down. And we haven't been forced to have this kind of conversation since the civil rights movement. But now you got to ask the question, whose rights are being violated at the First Amendment level and at the civil rights level now? But to get that started, if I'm Little Boosie, I'm going to get that conversation started by putting at a minimum a $10 million lawsuit against Planet Fitness for loss of potential wages, emotional damage, violation of civil rights, all of that. I'm on it. But again, see, this is why I don't believe that these guys are as rich as people say. Because as a working class man, I can afford to go get a lawyer for $5,000 to put in a lawsuit against Planet Fitness. All you got to do is get the first motion filed. About some people will do it for $1,500, depending on how strong they think your case is. So how Snoop Dogg and Lil Boosie have not filed any cases, I don't know. So I guess having a bunch of money and no knowledge, it doesn't do you any good. So he says that Planet Fitness is privately owned, so it's going to be tough. Even though it's privately owned, D-Mac, it still has to be a conversation that's had. Because if that's the case, that you can now discriminate based on private, guess what's going to happen? See, D-Mac, I don't know if you see what kind of can of worms that opens up. So if the issue is that any private company can discriminate, well, guess what? Half of your companies in America, maybe even more than half, are private companies. And the Civil Rights Act says that you can't just discriminate like that. They have specific rules. Companies that have more than 15 employees, even though they're private, still have to follow certain civil rights laws. So what I'm saying is that the can of worms that Planet Fitness may have just opened up is going to be crazy. Because think about how many ways that we have of distinguishing each other from each other. We have religion, we have our race, we have our gender, sex, income. Man, so you got a whole bunch of lawsuits that could come. But again, I don't have any faith in Lil Boosie. And remember, Planet Fitness has been sued numerous times in the past, and they've lost almost every case. This isn't the first time that Planet Fitness has done something that is kind of discriminatory. And they've actually did settlements with people before. So Black Torch says to file a lawsuit is only $250 in New York. There you go. So why he wouldn't get on this right away, I don't know. But we'll see. We'll see. So you said that they feel the person is violating their conduct. But the question becomes, that's again, D-Mac, that's your opinion. That's not what a judge might say. Your opinion is that. But any given judge may think completely different. They might say, well, he wasn't even on the grounds of the facility when he said that. That was he had a private conversation that went public, but that was under the First Amendment. He didn't do anything on site that caused any danger or anything. That's thought policing, man. So D-Mac, you may think that, but do you understand that there's hundreds of judges that will disagree with you? I can pull up the Federalist Society right now, who is responsible for vetting all of Donald Trump's judges and actually grooming law school students to become pro-Constitution, that will 100% disagree with you. Because you got to look at it through the lens of the Civil Rights Act and then the First Amendment. That's a lot of legal statutes to get through that's protecting you from this. So that's the question. This is thought policing at this point, man. So that means that me right now having this conversation about eugenics, every membership that I have at a gym right now, every company that I do banking with right now, because I have a credit union that's a credit union account. There's private banks out here. Then there's public banks, but not all banks are publicly owned. So that means that a bank can deny you a home loan or deny you a credit card because you have political views that are not in the mainstream, or maybe in the mainstream, but that are not actually co-signed by the elites. Is that what you're saying, D-Mac? Because that's the road that Planet Fitness would be going down. If you can discriminate against someone for political views in a gym membership because you said it's a privately owned, you haven't looked at how much of what you do is privately owned. There's car companies right now that are privately owned. So if you're saying this is a legal precedent, then you put the case in the chat right now. Put the precedent that you're referencing right now in the chat. I will write that case down. I will read about it. Then I'll come back with an open panel and you can come on and we can discuss that case. I'm not going to comment on a case that I don't know what you're referring to. I'm telling you that if you can discriminate against privately over someone's political views strictly, then there's car companies out there that are privately owned that they could just say, hey, you're a Democrat, you can't buy a car from us. And the Civil Rights Act doesn't protect a company just because it's private. If you have more than 15 employees, you can be a private company and still have to be under the laws of the Civil Rights Act. So you give me the case. I don't want to hear none of this like you just generalize. Give me the case, bro, before I get to this this document since you said it. You said that it's precedent. I love reading about precedent. So you give me the name of the case so I can write it down before I move on. You said the legal precedent has already been set. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. Okay. What's the case? D-Mac, you still haven't given me the name of the case. You just said it's legal precedent. So give me the name of the case and the year and the court so I can look it up. Because if you can discriminate on political views, then you can discriminate on race, gender, and everything now. So give me the case, bro, so I can move on. If you don't know the case, say you don't know the case and stop telling lies. Otherwise, give me the case. Because you just said it's legal precedent. So if it's legal precedent, that means there's a case out there at the federal or Supreme Court level that I can just go look up right when I get off here, and then I'll come back with a whole panel. And we'll discuss it. Because I love reading legal cases. And I'm very interested in this question because we're about to go down a road this decade that hasn't been gone down since the 60s. All right, never mind. So D-Mac is just talking, man. I gave this man a 5 minutes to give me the case. He don't got the case. He's just talking. So you said it was a decision that was passed on. Okay, well, I'm going to go get to this article, and you come up with the case before I get off here, man. Hey, Sir Charles, let his message go through for now because he said he's going to come back with the case. But if he don't come back with the case in the next 15 minutes, then, just mute his ass. But let him go through because he said that he got to look it up. So give him a chance to look it up. But these dudes kill me. Man, this legal precedent. And you just ask, well, what is the case? Oh, I don't know the case. These guys, man, crack me up, dude. So let me get to the report, man. Getting back to this issue of demographics and the breeding out fallacious argument. So I'm gonna bring it up for everybody. So, all right, people. Here is the policy report that was presented to the 114th Congress back in June 2015. Brought before the House. We're going to work through this. I'm going to kind of just read it and then go back to the chat, see what you guys have to say about certain aspects. So it was called The Effects of Abortion on the Black Community. Here's the research team. You had Christina Daniels, Catherine Davis, Ifoma Anonkor, and Star Parker. And this came from the, one of the organizations was called the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Now, this was very interesting to me because this is Jesse Jackson speaking right here. Many of you are going to be shocked to learn that this is something that Jesse Jackson said before he received all that money from Planned Parenthood and other abortionists. He says, politicians argue for abortion largely because they do not want to spend the necessary money to feed, clothe, and educate more people. Here, arguments for inconvenience and economic savings take precedence over arguments for human value and human life. Psychiatrists, social workers, and doctors often argue for abortion on the basis that the child will grow up mentally and emotionally scarred. But who of us is complete? If incompleteness were the criterion for taking life, we would all be dead. If you can justify abortion on the basis of emotional incompleteness, then your logic could also lead you to killing for other forms of incompleteness, blindness, crippleness, old age. So there you have the Reverend Jesse Jackson making his statement in January 1977, before he ran for president, talking about abortion was a form of eugenics. Right there, people. But that Rainbow Coalition of his has received a lot of money from the pro-eugenicists since 1977. And this is why I keep telling you individuals that you got to put your mind first. Stop looking for other people to do your thinking for you, especially celebrities. They are the worst person to look to for truth because they will flip the script for that bag overnight. But you, always being a critical thinker and not promoting celebrities, you will always be in the winning position. But those are the words of Jesse Jackson describing abortion as pro-eugenics before he received all that money from the pro-eugenicists. And he made a great argument. So it says, since the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, over 54 million babies have been aborted in centers around the nation. Now, that was between 1973 and 2015. It can be said with certainty that the practice has had a personal, practical, and political effect on communities and citizens. Every town, city, ethnicity, and age group has suffered from the tragic effects of the mostly surgical and sometimes medical procedure. The true toll of abortion may remain unknown and immeasurable because the data, for the most part, has not been collected or has been ignored by those responsible for its collection. The so-called right to privacy that allowed abortion on demand was created by the Supreme Court for women. But for 40 years now, that right has been extended to the abortionists as well. This shroud of privacy enables abortionists to literally get away with murder and mayhem as thousands of women are injured each year. Abortion has become the most unregulated industry in the United States because governors, legislators, and attorney generals fail to enforce or write laws that will actually protect women. In addition to a lack of regulation, the ravages of choice continue to take a toll on individuals, families, states, and economic stability of the nation. This report seeks to examine this issue in the hopes that Congress will consider investigations to explore the physical, legal, cultural, and economic harm abortion has created in our nation. So I'm going to stop there for a minute, check the chat before we get into a little bit more of the data and see what you guys have to say about the opening statement to Congress that day. So what do you all in the chat think about what Jesse Jackson said? Is Jesse Jackson right when he said it before he ran for president that abortion is a eugenics movement? Was he correct? If you think Jesse Jackson was correct, put a 1 in the chat. If you think not, then put a 2. But I think Jesse Jackson made such a great argument. But again, that's why the worst thing that you can do is believe in a black leader. You're your own leader. Do not listen to these people that the corporate America puts up there as black leaders. There are no black leaders. You are your own leader. There ain't nothing these corporate spokespeople have that you don't have anymore. All the academic studies, all the journals, all the books you have at your fingertips. So he sold out his own views as a reverend, as someone that grew up on the Old Testament for that money. That's why you don't look to no leaders. You are your own leaders, which is our strongest position. When every rank and file man has at least a basic elementary understanding of the major issues that these politicians in corporate America push before you. When the rank and file black man has a basic understanding of all the 9 areas of human activity, that's when things will start to change visually. That's when they will start to change. Stop looking for people like Jesse Jackson to solve any problems. They're not going to solve any problems. All they're going to solve is the problem of their bank account. That's it. So, all right, the majority says that he was right. So for all those that's talking about these polls, that's a real poll. Those is regular black men. So for those academics that are watching, for the Chop It Up Tour Democrats that's watching, and anyone else, you want to know what black men think about this? According to those in my chat, they believe that it's eugenics. SKC says, interesting piece of work here. Of course, there is a band of brothers here on YT who preach that black woman abortion numbers are incorrect. The stream will be a staple to disprove that lie. Yeah. Hey, before I go back to the report, did DMAC come back with the case or not, man? Because I want to see if he got the case before I go back to the report, because I won't be able to see the chat. Did he come back with the case yet or not? See, what has happened is that your rank and file black man didn't move leftward over the last 25, 30 years. We stayed pat. Everyone else moved towards the communist way of thinking. See what I'm saying? Black men didn't change their views from Jesse Jackson. He changed his views, but black men never changed their views for the most part. That's why I don't like this term conservative or liberal, because Jesse Jackson was a Democrat. And he's still, I guess, a Democrat. But the kind of Democrat he was in the late 70s is the kind of Democrat that most black men are today. I guess they called it like a Reagan Democrat. Most black men are still true Democrats. It's the other extremes of both parties that went in a different direction. But black men didn't change their views. So I haven't seen DMAC respond yet. So I'm going to go back. You guys keep an eye, because when I bring the screen back up, I can't note when he comes in. And I do want to get that case because I hadn't heard of it. And I got to look into this. So I'm going to go back to the document. But so back to this document. It says the abortion consumer. Now look at how they worded that, the abortion consumer. Because again, remember that these ladies say my body, my choice. But the part they don't tell you is that usually it's their body, their choice, and your debt that you're paying. Why are taxpayers paying for 21 million abortions just of black fetuses since 1973, and a total when all races of women are taken together, 54 million fetuses discarded during that period. That's something that Bernie Sanders can pay for with his money. That's something that private organizations can pay for, and that's something that private citizens can pay for. But taxpayers should not be on the hook for paying for these abortions, period. Just that simple. So it says, disproportionately, the leading consumer of abortionist services is the African American female. Just listen to this is like a bank almost. They said disproportionately, the leading consumer of the abortionist services is the African American female. According to the 2011 abortion surveillance report issued by the CDC, Black women make up 14% of the childbearing population, yet obtained in 2015 36.2% of reported abortions. Now that was back, that information was almost 10 years old. So the question is, did that number go up since 2010 and 2011? Did it stay the same? Did it drop? I'll leave that for you all to speculate until 2020. But Black women have the highest abortion ratio in the country, with 474 abortions per 1,000 live births. Wow. That's wow. That's like 40%. That's almost 50%, man. Damn. They have an abortion rate of almost 50%. 474 of 1,000. So they were pushing almost 50% back in 2011. So it says percentages at these levels illustrate that more than 19 million Black babies have been aborted since 1973. Now remember, that 19 million number was from 2015. So just keep that in mind. When you actually do the math, it's now 21 million, maybe just over it in 2020. Unreal. People, this is a congressional report from the 114th U.S. Congress in June 2015. At these levels, illustrate that more than 19 million Black babies have been aborted since 1973. And we're talking about breeding out, and we're talking about abortions. Stop it. If that's not eugenics and breeding out, then what is? According to the Departments of Public Health of every state that reports abortion by ethnicity, Black women are disproportionately lead in the numbers. For example, in Mississippi, 79% of abortions are obtained by Black women. Jesus Christ. Almost 80% of abortions in Mississippi are obtained by Black women. In Washington, D.C., more than 60%. Wow. Unreal. In Georgia, 59.4%. In Alabama, 58.4%. In state after state, similar numbers are found, with Black women aborting at 2, 3, or more times their presence in the population. At every income level, Black women have higher abortion rates than whites or Hispanics, except for women below the poverty line, where Hispanic women have slightly higher rates than Black women below the poverty line. The prevalence of abortion facilities within minority communities serves as a major contributor to the rate in which Black women obtain abortions. Accordingly, Black women are 5 times more likely to have an abortion than a white woman. A recent study released by Protecting Black Life and Outreach of Life Issues Institute concluded that 79% of Planned Parenthood surgical abortion facilities are strategically located within walking distance of African and or Hispanic communities. This study coincides with historical revelations that eugenicists dating to the mid-1900s argued that the most effective way they could advance their agenda would be to concentrate population control facilities within targeted communities. Historically, Blacks have been the unwitting victims of a hidden racist agenda of those behind abortion and birth control organizations because they believed they were receiving a new civil right, which is, in fact, pro-abortion forces have created messaging that reinforces the notion of abortion as a civil right, as seen in the 2012 meeting of the Congressional Black Caucus and Pro-Choice Caucus. On Capitol Hill, these advocates urged their constituents to challenge the pro-life position by accusing them of making the alleged disparity in healthcare for Black women worse. Perhaps unknowingly, these black legislators continually damage their political agenda because abortion is destroying their future constituency. Bingo. That right there is powerful. So when we're talking about this breeding out, when we're talking about this stagnation, that's the real issue. These women and their simp advocates are destroying the Native Black American constituency. Okay? They're the ones that are doing the breeding out, and they've been doing it. Their advocacy for continued funding of organizations like Planned Parenthood demeans and eradicates the concept of natural rights and denies the right to life to the most vulnerable of all, the unborn child. Establishing such a cultural norm erodes the natural rights of the elderly and the infirm, for if the powerful can determine that the unborn child does not have a natural, self-evident right to live, then it is very possible that they can and will determine that certain other humans no longer possess those rights as well. So I'm gonna stop there, let that sink in for a second, go back to the chat, see what you all have to say about that. Do you agree with the experts that the same people that tell you that you're breeding out by exercising your options based on assortative and sociological factors, they don't have anything to say about these black women joining with the white eugenicists in destroying 21 million fetuses over the last 40 some years? So DMAC says, let me see, I'm gonna bring up some of y'all's comments before I go back. So let me see. So what was DMAC saying? All right. So here's DMAC doing a follow-up. He says, I was off when I said that the legal precedent with that, the decision was so close that it's a stretch for me to even say that legal precedent has been set. Okay. So, I mean, the brother made a mistake. But if any of you have something that we can, build on for another conversation about the Planet Fitness thing, because I'm going to write that down, that I should look into the legal aspects of that Planet Fitness discrimination based on political views. I will look into it, but if you guys have some sources, hit me up on an email. But appreciate you going and confirming that, DMAC. So let me see. Shout out to the brother Dr. Phoenix, respect. Turbattle, Sir Charles, Russian Bot, Brian Washington, OJ did it, Russian Bot, Evan Duncan, SKC, 8 Wind. Appreciate y'all stopping in to have this discussion. It's important that we spread this information with each other. Sigma Jones, shout out to you. Now, Sigma Jones, he's always talking about this eugenic thing, so this report will be very good for him. He says, I'm going to talk about it tonight, but W. Du Bois even teamed up with Margaret Sanger for the Negro Project. Yeah. Well, there were a lot of Black American elites that teamed up with these white eugenicists during those first 30 years. I mean, look at the Tuskegee experiment. There were Black nurses and Black administrators that actually got paid. Tuskegee, as little as is known, the institution that Booker T. Washington created, they took a lot of money from the groups that were doing those Tuskegee syphilis experiments. And hopefully King Sigma Jones, in his discussion tonight, you guys make sure that you put that down, that he'll talk about that. But yeah, Tuskegee Institute actually fought for the private contract with them in the government, like the way that they do those contracts that the government issues. They fought for it and they bid on it. They actually volunteered Black people for the syphilis study. We don't talk about this stuff, see? They actually volunteered Black men for that project. They didn't care that it was going to destroy their lives. I'm telling you, man, do not trust these corporate leaders. Do not trust anyone that they call a Black leader, man. Trust yourself. So Dr. Phoenix says, and now you know why Black women tend to have some of the worst pregnancy outcomes, because of repeated abortion. It raises the risk of adverse events during pregnancy. No doubt, Dr. Phoenix. When I'm done with the project, man, Dr. Phoenix, if you're free, I'll be down for like 30 minutes if you want to come on and say something. But appreciate you, Jay Andrew, for the support of the discussion. I always appreciate you guys coming through, supporting the discussion. It incentivizes the research outside of my other responsibilities. It's not an easy thing to do. So definitely appreciate that. So Scud Missile says, I wonder what excuse these pro-Black simps will say they're going to use for these queens getting abortions. They always got some kind of excuse. They'll come up with something. But they're actually aborting their kids. So the same ones that you call like the Black woman first simp advocates, they're actually aborting their children. So that's the interesting thing about it. So yeah, I'll be interested to hear what they say about 21 million of their warrior class being destroyed. That was 21 million warrior class blacks. And since black women actually have more daughters, we could say it would have been like a 55-45% ratio, because black women actually have more daughters than boys. That's one of the good things about being a black man when you have a healthy culture. When our culture is healthy as Native Black Americans or any blacks on the planet, when it's healthy, when it's progressive, it's a great culture to be a man in, because the women outnumber us. So it creates like a powerful position for men. That's one of the reasons why the white eugenicists want the black woman to work with them, because they naturally, nature has made it so that the black woman produces an incentive for men to be strong and to be powerful, because the women, they produce more women than boys. So again, when you talk about white supremacy and all that, guess what? These women are acting as the assistant to the white eugenicists, and have been on this thing since the 1910s or something like that, 100 years. We're 100 years into this now. So SKC says, just downloaded the document. It is a cure document, urbancare.org, which is headed by Star Parker, a black woman, yet blacks on YT still try to deny this info as being whitewashed. Yeah, that's the funny thing. All of the people I named in that list, like 3 of them were black women out of the 5. It was like 2 white women and 3 black women that were before the Congress. So that, again, you cannot reason with these people. And so that's why I don't get into like individual conflict. I stick to the actual subject and force them to deal with the facts and the subject itself, because they want to draw you into like the personal anecdotal thing. I'm not doing that, and you shouldn't do it. Hey, appreciate you, the straight shooter. Y'all go support that man. He's really into promoting like freedom of choice among black men. So y'all look in the straight shooter. And I always consider it like a honorable thing when people that have been creating content for years come into my space and they feel that I'm adding something to the conversation. I take that with as an honor, just to let you guys know that create content, because I watch so much of your content. So Paris Fitzgerald says, yet black women get mad when black men's date and marry out, saying they're beating out the race. Oh yeah. Wait till I get through more of this report, man. It's comedy, bro. I mean, the black women were very silent on my last stream when I showed them what their grandmothers had in store for the rest of us back in the 70s. See, a lot of these women were programmed by the boomer women who really hated men. And I got to see more content from the boomer men about that period, the 1970s specifically, and what their relationship was with these feminist women, because one of the smears against the boomer men now is that these women were saying that it was not the black woman that was saying the educated lane. This is where it gets crazy, bro. These black feminists claim that the boomer man was the one that came up with the educated lane argument, saying that they didn't want a smart woman. So the argument that the misandrists of the 70s made was that no matter if the woman looked like Pam Grier or if she looked like Tammy Terrell, if she had a 4.0 GPA, they claimed that the men of that era didn't want them. So it's not, they claim that the boomer men were the one that started the whole educated lane thing. So that's the argument that the boomer feminist was making, that you can look like Tammy Terrell, you could look like Pam Grier, you could be as fine as a Dorothy Dandridge, but if you happen to be smart, then you were disqualified from getting pregnant or dating. I'm like, stop it. But that's the kind of arguments they make. And that's why it's important for the young man to now go back over these documents from our grandparents' generation. Because a lot of the people that claim that they're feminists, that jump on the misandrist boat, they don't even read this stuff. They don't even read this stuff from the 70s. They're just joining something that was already in place and riding the tide because they get clout, they can get money, they can get jobs, and they can also use it as like a wailing wall for their hatred of their fathers and brothers or whatever. But trust me, as you actually begin to read the documents and share them with other brothers, you come to find out that the opposition, they have never even read this stuff themselves. It's kind of like those people that say that they're a Christian or a Muslim or a Buddhist, but they've never actually sat down and read the Bhagavad Gita or the Bible or the Quran. They're just following what they walked into or were born into, but they don't actually know anything of the scriptures. So you can kind of look at this as like the feminist scriptures. That second wave produced a lot of academic writings. They organized themselves, and they've been controlling policy in America for the last 40 to 50 years. So it's critical that we actually go back and read the feminist scriptures. So the brother, the straight shooter, says, just let it burn. You can't fix this. We've been talking about this for damn near a decade, and they still vote for their own destruction. I mean, it's already burning itself down, man. It already is. But it is critical that more and more black men that come into these spaces, that they get this information, because almost every black man that I talked to in my last stream said they had never even heard of the Combahee River collective statement. They had never even heard of it. So it may be true that the older brothers like the straight shooter who have been in this space for 12 years know this stuff, but you have to understand, a lot of us just came in the last year or two. So you got to keep that in mind as well. So a lot of these people are just coming into this space, man. And we need to keep sharing the information and keep sharing it. And as different brothers move to different levels, it will be younger brothers that will replace them. There will be newer audiences and new content creators. There isn't no one size fit all with these conversations. And every year, there's going to be a new focus. There's going to be new content creators, and there's going to be a new audience for what I call the 10 sectors of the anti-black misandry sector and the free movement sectors, which has like 10 different lanes that I've noted. So at each stage, black men are going to go through different stages. You know what I'm saying? So some are going to enter this space. They're going to want nothing but red pill. Other brothers are going to be looking for travel information. Other brothers are going to be looking for information on quality stargates. You know what I'm saying? Other brothers are looking for understanding what it is to be a man in modern America. Some brothers will go through that process and say that to hell with it all and be looking for black pill information. But people are going to be at different stages. Content creators are going to retire out as well. That's something that we have to understand. So once you reach the point where you've mastered it, then you've retired yourself out of the conversation. And then the younger men, as they work through their own perspective, because the boomer man, the Gen X man, the millennial man, and the zennial man are going to have totally different takes on different topics as well. So we have to be cognizant of that as well. Let me see. They were saying breeding out the race, they acting like we're the prize. Scud missile. Hey man, let me get back to the report, and you'll see that they may say that, but their words do not match their actions, that's for sure. So the nameless protagonist, appreciate your support, brother. He says, you are showing us the feminist source code. It is critical for our reprogramming phase to divest our minds of the gynocratic operating system. Salute. Appreciate you, bro. Yeah, you know, some brothers have said, you know, I don't even care about the feminist scriptures or whatever, but look it, man, I'm all about having the primary source information. And I got the book, actually they say this one is the most critical feminist book, called The Female Eunuch. That one is sitting on my shelf because the next book I'm going to read is Daughters of the Trade, starting next week. And I like to take like a week or two off between reading things, but I'm going to read Daughters of the Trade. Then I'm going to begin peeling through The Female Eunuch that was written in 1970 by a white Australian feminist. And it's considered the landmark, the Bible of feminism in its non-Marxist form. Because again, feminism is communism. The root of feminism is communism. It was created by a white man. Okay? Let's not forget that. Feminism was created by a white man. Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, both white men. So there's a reason why I'm going through this feminist scriptures, because it all connects back to the root, communism, which goal was to destroy the private family in order to destroy the private individual. They wanted to destroy the private individual, private property, the private family, and to make everyone public assets of the government. Feminism is a tool of communists to do so. So I can't wait to go through the whole Jermaine Greer. Man, I thought Jermaine Greer was like a Harlem basketball player at the Rucker when I first heard that name. Thought it was a black guy. but it was actually a white Australian woman who is a silent. Again, the silent and the boomers had a lot of hatred of men. But her book is actually, it's so much of a part of the feminist canon, the communist canon, that it's considered a Harper's perennial landmark text. So for you brothers that say, well, we shouldn't read it, speak for yourself, man. You don't have to read it, but I'm going to read it and I'm going to share it with those that want to hear this information, man. Because some of us need to go through those scriptures. And you got to respect that people just at different places, man. For me, the stuff excites me because this is so much knowledge I didn't know. Again, I never took a gender studies class. I never cared for it until the Me Too thing popped off. And now I think it's critical that we go back and read things like the female eunuch, the sexual contract, the Coombe River Collective Statement, because these people have been shaping policy for black collective masses over the last 40 years, and you didn't even have a seat at the table. So how you can consider that not important, that's beyond me. The brother Harambe says, why do y'all think it was such a hatred for black men back then? Didn't men make sure that women were taken care of? That's what I'm trying to figure out. And hopefully as we go through the conversation on Sunday, we'll pull out more of this discussion. Maybe some of the boomers will show up. But I got to understand this more too, because what didn't make sense to me about it is that this second wave of feminism and this hatred of black men that they exhibited was only like 5-7 years after the Moynihan report. Because I'm always trying to I've been creating like my own little timeline of this stuff, right? So the Moynihan report is the opposite of every bit of feminist scripture that came out in the 70s. That was 1965, right? But when you look at like the feminists that I'm talking about, they were all doing their organizing during the early 70s, fresh off the Black Power movement. Many of them have been part of the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power movement, and they just made this flip within a 10-year time frame from black people to black woman first narrative at all cost. So I'm trying to figure it out too, and we're going to figure it out together over time. But let me get back to this statement, man. So they go on to say population control nexus. So not only are they saying that these women are abortion consumers and someone's making a lot of money off them, now they're getting to the population control as the nexus of this eugenicist policy of abortion. There is a widespread perception that women, particularly African-American women, are freely exercising their choice when they enter the doors of the nearest abortion center. Nothing can be further from the truth. The reality is that black women are being pushed, led from behind, into abortion centers by a cadre of elitists who agree with Frederick Osborne. You brothers write that name down. Frederick Osborne, the leading eugenicist of the 20th century, that birth control and abortion are turning out to be great eugenic advances of our time. Brothers, make sure you write that name down. Frederick Osborne, the leading eugenicist and abortionist of the 20th century. If they had been advanced for eugenic reasons, it would have retarded or stopped their acceptance. In fact, abortion is steeped in the population control agenda. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg reminded the nation of this in her 2009 New York Times Magazine interview when she said, frankly, I had thought at the time Roe was decided, there was concern about population growth, and particularly growth in populations that we don't want to have too many of. Oh, shit. People, we're talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the notorious RBG, the godmother of what they call the feminist movement. She said it herself that abortion was a population control eugenics program that wanted to get rid of people that we had too many of. And at that time, they were talking about black people, okay? All this immigration came after the 1980s. So who are they talking about? All this illegal immigration, all this foreign black immigration came post-1980s. Roe v. Wade was passed in 1973. The eugenics movement started in the early 1900s. So from the early 1900s to 1980, they could only be talking about black people and maybe the disabled white people and poor white people, but mostly they were talking about black people. Because again, remember, the year that Roe v. Wade was passed, 60 to 70% of all Black Americans were in poverty or at the poverty line. And we're going to talk more about that on Sunday as well, because that's something that we don't understand. The poverty numbers of Blacks have went down by like nearly 40% since 1970, around this time. So who do they want to get rid of the most? Poor people, the ones they consider to be disabled, degenerate, unworthy, uncouth. Those were the ones they want to get rid of. This is coming from RBG herself. Here's a quote from Richard Nixon where he says, "As I told you, we talked about it earlier, that a hell of a lot of people want to control the Negro bastards." There it is, people. Now, this ain't some think tank that was having a conversation. This is before the U.S. Congress that all this is being shared with. Barack Obama was president at the time, okay? Joe Biden was vice president. They came before the U.S. government and said, this is what Nixon said that can be confirmed. As I told you, because he was the president at that time. We talked about it earlier, that a hell of a lot of people want to control the Negro bastards. See how they look at us? Back in the 1970s, we were just Negro bastards. And these Black women and their sim advocates that chose to work with Nixon, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Frederick Osborne, and all these people, they just wanted a pat on the head from the dominant society telling them, you're doing a good job by getting rid of Black people. We don't need any more of you. And once we get y'all numbers low enough, we'll import Blacks that we choose from outside the country without the historical history of oppression that you guys have. So you guys get rid of these Negro bastards. So here goes some more quotes from them. A majority of people in Colorado voted for abortion. I think a majority of people in Michigan are for abortion. I think in both cases, well, certainly in Michigan, they will vote for it. Abortion because they think that's what's going to be aborted. Generally are the little black bastards. This is Nixon talking. These are all Nixon quotes. As I told you, we talked about it earlier, that a hell of a lot of people want to control the Negro bastards. You know what we are talking about, population control. Now, all this stuff is on tape. We're talking really, and what John Rockefeller really realizes, look, the people in what we call our class control their populations. So what he was saying right here is that the intelligent, educated people, they don't need eugenics because they practice discipline and family planning. But he said, he's talking about the poor Blacks. He says, sometimes these poor Blacks, they'll have a family of 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, but it's an exception, the 9. So here's Nixon talking to reporters in 72 about what the purpose of Roe v. Wade was as it was working its way to the Supreme Court that year. He was saying that the people in 1970s wanted abortion so that they can bring down the number of Black women having children, 6, 7, 8, or 9, as he just said right here. And he says, these are only a few of the sentiments of Nixon expressed in 1972, exposing the genesis of his thinking when he announced the conclusions and recommendations of the 1969 Population Control Commission, headed by John D. Rockefeller. Boom. There's another source for you all. So y'all write that down. 1969 Population Control Commission, created by Nixon. Now, this is right before Roe v. Wade, 1973, and 4 years after the Moynihan report came out from the Democrats. So this was a bipartisan thought process. This was a gender neutral process. They all wanted to get rid of as many Black people as they could. And that was headed by John D. Rockefeller. So hopefully you all got that, because you need to get these sources and get used to checking sources, man. Don't take my word for anything. Always check anything I tell you and give me sources that y'all find. It was in the spirit of these sentiments that Cecil Richards, president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, invited the Republican Party to return to its family planning roots. So everyone associates Roe v. Wade mostly with Democrats. But what you guys don't know, it was bipartisan. Democrats and Republicans believed in this kind of population control, and especially controlling Black women's bodies and how many children they were having. Believing Planned Parenthood no longer needed to hide the population control impetus of her organization, Richards stated, a lot of Republicans used to support family planning, and Richard Nixon signed that first federal planning program into law. There's a clear pathway to win Black women's support, and it's to listen to the middle of their party instead of the extreme fringe. The family planning mantra, a euphemism for abortion is no longer buried in the pages of Planned Parenthood's tax documents as it was in 2008. Planned Parenthood, believing abortion is so entrenched in the culture that it cannot be removed, now openly exposes what had been hidden, the work of controlling birth rates of those they consider dysgenic. Now, that's a word that Sigma Jones uses a lot, dysgenic. That's the root of abortion. It was created by Republicans and Democrats and those that hate Black people, and especially Black men. They believe that we couldn't breed logically and appropriately without control of the state and help from these private organizations funded by the state. That's your roots of abortion in America. So I'm going to go ahead and sign out of there, take a pause real quick, and go back to the chat. So let's see what you guys have to say about that. That was wow. So what do you all think about the fact that Richard Nixon was the main progenitor and spokesperson for getting Roe v. Wade passed? And he was actually part of his platform that when he ran for president was to bring down the population numbers of Black people, because it's so often associated with liberals and feminists. But no, they were all on this. In this, they agreed to work together on this one, man. They agreed to work together on this one. So you had all these liberals like Joe Biden types. They were all in for Roe v. Wade. The only reason that you see a lot of these quote unquote conservatives now all of a sudden against Roe v. Wade that it created, because they see white women are now killing off a lot of those white babies. Yeah, I said it. The reason why a lot of these so-called Republicans and so-called conservatives are suddenly against abortion is because now it's trickled down to white society. And a lot of the things that Moynihan warned that was going to happen to Black America, and of course this has happened, but now it's starting to trickle down. The drug usage, the abortion, the dysgenic breeding is trickling down to white people. And that's why you got the travel ban. That's why you got these white folks jumping on this shit. But when you go back to the origin, now you see that it's all political games, man. Hey, appreciate you, Sir Charles, man, and your support, brother. Really appreciate that, man. Thanks for tuning in. And, keeping an eye on the chat for me when you come through. Let's see. Azul says the Nixon Rockefeller era Republican were not influenced by the religious right. The conservatives came to the fore with Reagan. That's a good point, Azul. That's one of the reasons why I don't use political labels for myself, because you just get bogged down in these labels that ain't really telling the true story. And when you actually start going back through the history of the last 60 years, you find out all these very strange alliances that crossed all these labels. But in this situation with abortion, the main target was the Black family. Again, remember, all of this happened within the 10-year window of Moynihan's warning to policymakers, to the American public, and the Black people themselves. If we put the female in charge of the household, your political position and your economic position is going to be worse off than it is in 1965. And he was 100% correct. But he wasn't a part of the Roe v. Wade thing that came after him. So Nixon was on board, many Republicans were on board, the Democrats were on board, the white feminists were on board, and the Black feminist lesbian was on board as well. Because guess what? None of them gave a shit about Black people. They saw it as a way to get money for themselves and to put themselves in positions on boards that promoted this kind of, abortion or whatever. It was a lot of money in it. Because again, when you have a policy that starts off as a private policy, but then you make it a public issue, that means money. Just look at Donald Trump's budget this year. It was like 43 billion or something like 43 trillion. I mean, my bad. His budget, Donald Trump's 2020 budget is actually bigger than Barack Obama's budget was in the years that I checked, 2014 and 2016, by like $1 trillion. And I'm asking the question, where is all this money going to? I mean, $43 trillion budget? Come on, man. So I don't know what a conservative is. I don't know what a liberal is. I don't know what a Democrat is. I don't know what a Republican is. But I do know what a Black misandrist is. I do know what that is. But these political labels are very deceptive in 2020, man. So the brother SKC says, perhaps the baby mama was part of the culture then and recognized as a degenerate family structure. Well, yes, it was, SKC. In Moynihan, when he did that report, it was at around 25%. And Lyndon B. Johnson and the quote unquote white liberals of that day considered it like a social epidemic and a crisis, that it was at 25%. But what happened is that once they actually started investing in black men through some of these policies to strengthen the black family, many white men got afraid of so many black men starting to go to college, starting to come into their jobs. Then there's the sexual competition thing, seeing white women staring at them, you know? So let's not act like that is not there. And so they say, you know what? Moynihan was right and all, but that's just going to be something that the blacks got to deal with. Let's get these black men out of these jobs, get them out of these educational institutions, and get these women in here. Let's get these white women in here. And let's bring in the black women so we can use them as our concubines. But we got to get these black men out of these universities, out of these jobs, because they're going to become our competition in 30, 40 years. See, they were thinking ahead. They know that everything Moynihan said was true. But they said they put the onus on the black family themselves and said, you guys are going to have to figure this out without the government's help, because we see y'all as a threat on the low. So Black Eurostrike says the only real differences between the political parties are who are their majority economic backers. Yeah, I mean, you know, when you look at today's Democrat, again, they're the party of misandry, 100%. With the Republicans, they're the party of the military-industrial complex is what I would say. If I was going to try to describe them, I would say that they're the party of the military-industrial complex and that they're pro-white male. So they're not necessarily anti-black male, the Republicans right now, but they're definitely pro-military industrial context and pro-white male. So it's almost like a lot of their policies that end up impacting black men are an indirect result of black men being correctly situated in the economy. And they're also against illegal immigration. So that's what I do agree with the Republicans on. I'm closed borders. I only want legal, fully vetted immigrants coming here. And the American first ideology, I can get on board with that. But that's why I keep my position as a capital independent, capital I independent, a lowercase closed border libertarian is the best way I can describe my ideology right now. So the brother Biscuit, appreciate you, bro. He says, thanks for this stream. Hey, man, you know, thanks for coming through and joining the conversation and helping me work through some of these thoughts. Bennett Elliott Trucking, he says, economic policy drives this. Also, you have white despair due to economic conditions, opioids, and so on. Look at Japan, expensive living, stagnant economy, negative birth rate. Yeah. I mean, you do have that negative birth rate going on in a lot of these westernized countries and G20 countries. And there's like a divestment of men from society that they don't feel like rewards them for their efforts and their sacrifices, and that they've just become like automaton utilities for concerns that have nothing to do with them. And that's what you have. You have a lot of men saying, I'm done. I'm walking away. I'd rather be alone than to be a utility for a society that hates men. That's what they're going to have to deal with. And you're starting to see a lot of the feminists from the fourth wave crying because they can't get married and they can't find a man because they believed all the lies that were just experiments from the boomer women. These boomer women had never lived the life of these millennial women and Gen X women. They didn't know what the actual consequences would be for promoting promiscuity, irresponsible childbirth, putting your career first before a family, mistreating men. Remember, this was a Karl Marx inspired experiment. They didn't have these things. The boomer woman was raised in traditional two-family homes. Remember that. So a lot of what they were jumping on was put into their minds by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels and other communists that came later, telling them that they were going to have like this gynotopia type thing. That's the terminology that I use. Gynotopia, or what some people call a gynocracy. But a gynocracy speaks to the political control thing, but I'm talking about the dream and the fantasy that was sold to the women of the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the new millennium. They were sold that you were going to have this gynotopia future where you had this small supply of men that were just going to ride you good. And then when you turn 30, there would be a supply of nicely feminized eunuchs there to marry you. Well, guess what? The experiment didn't plan for the invention of the internet. The experiment couldn't foresee men finding out what the game plan and the blueprint was to enslave them to promiscuous, unqualified women. Now they have to deal with what they didn't plan for. And they didn't plan for many women finding out that they weren't going to get this happiness that they were guaranteed. They were guaranteed the Superman and being the super eunuch, right? That was what they were promised by Germaine Greer. That's what they were promised by the Kumbe Collective River. That's what they were promised by Dr. Carol Pateman. When we shred this sexual contract, it's going to work out really good for the rank and file woman. That's what they told them. Now, the woman suffering the most is the rank and file, working class, working poor woman. She's being worked like a slave out there with a whole lot of debt and a whole lot of pain and loneliness right now. Guess what? Germaine Greer made millions off of her book. Her book is a Harper's perennial bestseller. Usually Harper perennial books are only like economics books, classic history books. Her book is considered the landmark text of feminist literature in the second wave. And every one of you should read it. I can't wait to read it sometime in April. And I'm going to we're going to have a real good discussion. But my point is that these women were promised something that no one could guarantee because it was an experiment. And now the women of the great grandchildren and the grandchildren of the Germaine Greer, who I think she's dead now, but she was around 83 years old last time I checked. So either she's alive and she's like in her 80s, or she died recently at around 83. But their grandchildren are suffering because these women were guaranteed something that those women couldn't provide for them through the state, you know? So the brother Black Eurostike says they also didn't anticipate the ascent of video games and online porn and how much they would replace men's motivations to go along with female BS. Oh, absolutely. See, under Germaine Greer's plan, she thought that sexual access was all that a man valued. Like they really believed that. That was how lowly they thought of men, even though their ability to print their books, their ability to have platforms to speak on was created by men. So somehow these women told themselves that the men that created all this technology, that created all these printing presses, steam engines, radio and all this, somehow those men were inferior to them. And they told themselves that if it wasn't for men, they could have done it. But here's the question. So they've been at this for like 50 years. How much have they created with all the power, money, and access that they have? What have they created that has changed society for the better? Where are all these women that are creating internet technology, steam engines, building buildings, building bridges? I don't see it. So what we're seeing is that the experiment didn't go the way that they planned, and they're too proud to admit it. So what they do, they focus on social type issues and shaming and smearing men because that's a natural part of what they like to do. People stuff, not actual ideas, not actually creating industries, but focusing on things related to people and social things. So that's why you get the Me Too thing as being representative of the fourth wave, because it deals with going after men's sexual behavior. It goes after castrating men. It goes after controlling how men engage with women on the streets and things like that. That's social stuff. But it has nothing to do with improving efficiency in the marketplace. It has nothing to do with improving the engineering of cars. That's where these creators of society focus their energy. So Scott Haywood says, appreciate you for your support, bro. He says your work is spot on as usual. Yeah, appreciate that, Scott, man. So I'm gonna get back to reading a little bit more of this document before I get out of here. But I just kind of want to share that report with you all, and I'll make sure to put it in the chat as well before I get off here. But so let's see. Let's go back to the report, because it's important that you guys have these primary documents to use against the academics that will be coming into our spaces more and more as the year goes on, and they become more and more aware that Black men are not going for the old, scam of you just show up and vote for us because you've been voting for us because your daddy voted for us, your grandmama voted for us, and your granddad voted for us. That ain't gonna work with this generation of Black men. So mark my words, South Carolina primary debate is tonight, and the South Carolina primary is on Saturday, I believe. So the results of that is going to determine a lot. And once those primaries are over, And then you got Super Tuesday on March 3rd. There is going to be a nationwide panic amongst Democrats that don't support Bernie Sanders, because he's going to sweep the Super Tuesday. Texas and California, he's going to win that, watch. And at that point, they can't stop him by any traditional devices that they have. A broker convention is off the table at that point if he wins Texas and California. So guess what they're going to be doing? They're going to be coming out to you black men. Hey, black men, y'all got to help us stop Bernie Sanders. And you're going to ask them, why? Because your dad voted for us. Your grandfather did. Well, I don't care if my dad voted for you. Well, Donald Trump's a racist. Well, you a racist too. Well, we're less of a racist than Donald Trump is. How does that put food on my table? How does that put me in a stronger job position? How does that allow for me to have wealth? How does that allow me to catch up with you economically? Well, we ain't talking about that, though. We just talking about the fact that your granddad and your grandma voted for us. So that's what you're going to start hearing. So you're going to have more of these academics coming into our spaces. So you need to have the academic tools, because this is going to go from a Rucker League to now the pros are going to start having to deal with us, because we're stealing the audience from them. We're stealing the influence from them. We're giving them democracy that they don't want. So going back to the document, the racist and eugenic roots of the abortion movement. It is no accident that abortion has become so deeply entrenched within the Black community. Margaret Sanger, founder of the American birth control movement, was a leading spokesperson and activist in promotion of controlling the birth rate among Blacks and others she considered genetically inferior. An avid supporter of eugenics, Sanger became a formidable force when pushing her Negro Project, designed to employ Black leaders to promote first birth control and later abortion as viable options for quote-unquote family planning. She favored Malthusian branch of eugenics, frequently saying the genetic makeup of the poor and minorities, for example, was inferior. Now, she mentions Malthusian eugenics. That's a book that you all can get for free on the internet now. And if you want the hard copy form, you can get it for like $2 or $3. It's one of those books that's produced by Penguin Classics from the this scientist and a botanist named Thomas Malthus. He was one of the original, because you had like I would even say you had 3 phases of this eugenics thing over the last 200 years, right? You had those scientists that were in Europe during like the late 1700s through the 1800s. Then you had a more advanced version that came about during the 1900 to about 1960s. Then you had this third, very, very smooth version of it that you got with Roe v. Wade. So it became regular policy, but it had like 3 phases to this eugenics that really wanted to get rid of Black people. You know what I'm saying? So Sanger believed it was necessary to reduce the birth rate among the diseased, the sickly, the poverty-stricken, and antisocial classes, elements unable to provide for themselves, and the burden of which we are all forced to carry. So for her, they wanted to get rid of those people that they considered the undesirables. Now you can see how we got the Nazi movement and the Holocaust and the Tuskegee experiment all during the same time frame. Everyone acts like the Holocaust was an accident. No, it was policy over the last couple of generations before World War II, and it was a influx of propaganda as the TV became more widespread, as radio became more widespread. So they kept selling this idea. That's why when the Germans were sold the idea that, we need to get rid of these, 11, 15 million Jews, Black people in Germany, gypsies, and the disabled and the elderly, they had already been sold a program through the ideology, through the literature, through the TV and radio, that it was a good thing, that you were a good citizen to get rid of these people. So Jews amongst anyone should know better, because this is what Sanger and them was talking about. They were considered the undesirables in Germany, so it was nothing to exterminate 10 to 15 million of them, nothing. So heavily relying on members of the Black elite to help craft her message. Now there it is, heavily relying on members of the Black elite to help craft her message, the Negro Project, influence respected Black leaders, there's that Black leaders, enticing them to Sanger's cause. This is why I keep telling y'all, listen to Mr. Neely Fuller. We don't need Black leaders. You need Black spokespeople for a narrative, but you are your own leader. So you have your voting block but then you have your individual thinking. You never give that up because of, like, let's say you come together as a voting bloc on one or two issues. Once you allow the corporate America to anoint you a leader, you're finished. They don't have no white leaders, but they always got a anointed black leader. So they say, although leaders such as Marcus Garvey strongly denounced birth control and abortion as detrimental to the survival of the black race. Now, salute to the elder Marcus Garvey. He was against this abortion stuff. He saw what Margaret Sanger and the eugenicists were trying to do. But W.E. Du Bois, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, the National Urban League, Mary McLeod Bethune, founder of the National Council of Negro Women, and J.T. Braun, editor-in-chief of the National Baptist Convention Sunday School Publishing Board in Nashville, Tennessee. They were all on board with it. Sanger's organization continues in this vein, persuading those whom blacks trust that Planned Parenthood is for the benefit of the black race. Today, the growing list of cronies of the abortion industry includes Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, and almost the entire Black Congressional Caucus, and now their most prized gem, the President of the United States, Barack Obama, who has openly resisted any regulation of the most unregulated industry in the nation. So all these different organizations like the Rainbow Coalition, Al Sharpton, they've gotten that bag because the true power in any nation is the masses. You sitting up there listening to Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, Barack Obama, thinking that they're powerful. They have no power unless you give your consent. There is no such thing as a celebrity unless there's a paparazzi. There's no such thing as a politician in a constitutional republic having power without the consent of the governed and without your approval, whether you vote or don't vote. But it's always with you, the consumer. We don't think of politics as consuming, but it is. You're consuming the administration of the state and how it's going to be administered. So when you go out there being a paparazzi for Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, or any celebrity, you're giving them power. And just like they were given power, you have the power to take it away. And it's important that you know what they're doing with that power that you've allocated to them and delegated to them. But it's not an inherent power that they have. Al Sharpton is only as powerful as you Black Americans in Gen X and boomers have made him. Jesse Jackson is only influential as Gen X and boomers made him. No one that's not of those generations cares about Jesse Jackson. He don't speak for me, and he don't speak for any of the brothers in this chat. I'll tell you that. So it says paying Black staff members into the six figures, Planned Parenthood and other abortion supporters have fanned their advocates across the Black community, spouting a deceptive but unified message of the lack of access to quality health care. Supported by funds provided through such foundations as those headed by the Fords, Rockefellers, Carnegies, Gates, George Soros, and others, pro-abortion forces deliberately craft messages that play on the fears of some Blacks that a lack of access to abortion is somehow discriminatory. Then and now, Sanger's organization has used trusted leaders to convince the Black community that abortion as a form of birth control is not only acceptable, but also beneficial to African American culture. Although Sanger has often been acclaimed as a champion for human rights, her philosophy was actually quite racist and bigoted. According to George Grant, author of Grand Illusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood, there's another resource for you all to keep asking me about books. You keep asking me about resources. I've given you 4 already. Here's another one. Grand Illusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood. Now remember, these books are older books, so many of these books are free online. So keep that in mind. So you can find most of these books in PDF format for free. So it's called Grand Illusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood by George Grant. Sanger's philosophy on race, known as scientific racism, discriminates against other ethnicities based on quality of genes. In Sanger's eyes, scientific racism is, in the case of the Black community, includes skin color. Grant exposes Sanger's discriminatory notions and documents many inflammatory comments she made during her tenure. So I'm gonna go back to the chat for a moment. Not gonna read the whole report because I only got like 30 minutes to spare, but I I really wanted to get some of these major points to you all, man. So there you have it. The truth about Margaret Sanger. You have a lot of these black feminists and their drones who will try to come out and tell you Margaret Sanger wasn't no racist. She wasn't no racist. But these people don't have the primary documentation from back in when she was alive. She was rolling with Madison Grant. Now, some of you brothers know who Madison Grant was. When you think of a white racist, Madison Grant was one of the smoothest white racists. He was a Harvard and Yale educated attorney. He was from New York, and he wrote like the famous book called The Passing of the Great Race. And he was warning back in the 1900s that if they didn't get control of the black population, this shit is unbelievable, man. He said that there would be blacks would start to outnumber white people. So you might not want to think about it, but a lot of policies that have come out of the Republican and Democratic Party over the last 100 years were made to keep down the black population, from abortion to the drug war to the promotion of alternative lifestyles. All of these things, if you really just take your emotions out of it, take your political preferences out of it, and look at it independently and listen to what they were saying themselves, almost all of these programs have in some way controlled the numbers of black Native Americans. Open borders keeps down the numbers of black people. Abortion, 21 million fetuses aborted in black America since 1973. Okay? This is all part of their plan. Madison Grant, he wrote the book, and it is available for free, called The Passing of the Great Race. This wasn't no white redneck dude, man. You know, this was like one of these suit-wearing, Harvard-educated white dudes, and he was a straight-up eugenicist, man. And he was one of Margaret Sanger's mentors. He was the one that was helping her get the money from Rockefellers and the Carnegies at that time to get Planned Parenthood off. And again, now you know why they want to censor us so badly. Because we bring in them receipts, baby. We bringing them, man. They've never seen rank and file black men have these kind of discussions at large. But yet they get to call us stupid every day. You black men can't read. You black men aren't smart. You black men ain't shit. They tell you this every day. And I say they, meaning all the enemies of black men, including other black men. But they won't tell you this truth over the last 100 years. That's why we're doing this thing across the 9 sectors of human activity, and we're doing it in blocks. It's important that we do it in blocks so we all can be on the same page, so we can do this history. I don't need a boomer man or a silent man to come tell me anything. I can do the research myself. He can join in the conversation, but I'm not dependent on older blacks to tell me anything anymore. I'm going and doing my own research. And then we can have a conversation with my primary documents and your experience, and we can have that conversation, but I'm not doing this appealing to authority fallacy anymore. Well, Jesse Jackson said it. No, he has no credibility with me. And you all should start throwing these documents back in their face. Madison Grant, the powerful attorney, rich white dude in New York, was the mentor of Margaret Sanger. And they were students and pupils of Frederick Osborne. And their ideas led to the Holocaust and the Tuskegee experiment and a lot of other bad shit that happened during Jim Crow apartheid. Okay? We don't even know the amount of experiments that were done on black people during Jim Crow apartheid between the 1890s and 1965. We don't know how many experiments were done on them. Many of this stuff we're going to have to rediscover ourselves because the information is out there through the Freedom of Information Act. We can get a lot of this information and we're going to just keep chugging along, man. So let me get back to, I want to read a couple more main points from here. And then I'm going to just go ahead and get off here and let y'all look up the rest of the document yourself. But just want to take a couple major points from the rest of the document. So let me go to this. Let me see. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the cost of abortion and its economic impact on Black Americans. So let's get to this. Because it always comes back to the dollars. Because when you see your presidents having budgets of 37 trillion, 40 trillion, 43 trillion, and you start actually counting how much money that is in your head, and you start asking, Where is all this money going to? It's not going to you. And then you wonder why you're having tax rates of 25, 30, 40%, and none of it's going back to you. That's why, because it's going to all these private companies, shell companies, think tanks, and organizations that don't do you no good and don't benefit you at all. So the cost of abortion is economic impact. Very few think about the cost of abortion other than in the context of the price to get one. Yet the numbers demonstrate there is indeed a price to be paid when the population equivalent to the 73 largest cities from New York all the way down to the cities the size of Chandler, Arizona, have been aborted. I mean, that's powerful right there. You could build 5 New York cities, population-wise, that would equal the amount of American abortions since 1973. You could literally build 5 New York cities across America just in that 40-year plus period, just based on how many American children have been aborted. So it says abortion drives the greatest healthcare and education crisis in history. It says another consequence of abortion is a disastrous shift in the supply-demand equation that underlies our economy. The abortion boom is also behind the crisis in Social Security and Medicare. So here's like one of these abortionists that was into killing black babies from Philadelphia. So here's the story of Kermit Gosnell. On March 18, 2013, the trial of abortion monster Dr. Kermit Gosnell began in Philadelphia. 2 months later, Gosnell was convicted on 3 charges of murder, 21 felony counts of performing illegal late-term abortions, and 211 counts of violating the 24-hour informed consent laws. Gosnell's convictions really just reflected the tip of the iceberg of what was going on in his clinic until inspectors showed up in February 2010 as a result of an investigation for suspected illegal drug prescription use. So that's a case you guys can look up yourself. But again, you know, it's a money thing too. So when someone's coming to one of these doctors and they're telling them, hey, you know, I decided that my baby's going to be born next week and I don't want it, and they come to that person with like 5 G's, they're doing these things. So this is a conversation that we're going to have. It's a very uncomfortable conversation. It's third rail, but it's a conversation that each individual black man is going to have to decide on where they stand. I told you in the opening where I stand, and some brothers will agree, some will disagree. But it's important that you as a citizen that you have this conversation because they're paying for it with your tax dollars. We think the reason no one acted is because the women in question were poor and of color, specifically black, because the victims were infants without identities and because the subject was the political football of abortion. So again, all these think tanks, all these little nonprofit organizations that have been getting all this money off of the plight of the single black mother, man, they haven't cared a shit about these black women. You got these black women out there that have gotten rich, man. You know, they've gotten rich off of selling the idea that they speak for these black women that are poor and that don't have these access to these kind of monies. So they getting all these grants from the government while they paying themselves $200,000 a year, living out in the suburbs in $1 million mansions. While talking about I head a nonprofit organization that helps single mothers, and single mother family households in the worst condition they've been in since fucking 1965. But they won't. But the elite feminists and their drones won't tell you this stuff. They won't share this information with you because they don't care about the black family either. So it says here that a call to action. In the 40 years since the legalization of abortion, there have been 5 Republican and 3 Democratic presidents. In fact, Roe was decided when Richard Nixon was the president. He not only supported the decision, but also initiated the population control agenda that has been steeped in the industry since its inception. At least 3 of the 5 Republican presidencies were undergirded with a Republican Senate and House for a part, if not all, of their terms. During the same time period, Republican presidents appointed and the Congress confirmed many of the Supreme Court justices' appointments most thought would ensure the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Yet we have had 55 million babies aborted here in America. It is hard to see any progress at a federal level to stem the tsunami that has consumed the lives of 1.2 million or more babies every year since 1977. There you go, people. So when you get these people trying to come to you saying, well, the Republicans, no, they don't know their history. Nixon and the Republicans were behind abortion as a form of population control of Black people. Democrats jumped on board because, again, they're all funded by the same organizations over the last 40, 50 years. So everyone's looking for government to solve your problems. Government ain't going to solve most of your problems, man. Government is a supplement to problems that you know how to solve, that you specifically have an agenda to solve. Then you take the government dollars, or you demand the government don't take the dollars from you in the first place. You start asking your government, why are we paying 20%, 30%, 40% taxes? They got to show you an itemized report showing you what you're getting for your tax dollars. But you haven't been asking them that. $43 trillion so they can buy a fucking jet from Boeing that ain't never going to be flown. I mean, this is the kind of games they're playing with you all. They've been telling you all your life that you're dumb, that you can't think for yourself. And the moment that you start speaking for yourself, they do you like they did Snoop Dogg, and they bring you before on do public lynchings of you before the masses of people to destroy your life when you start saying, actually, I do have an opinion. But they don't like that. They like democracy when no one's practicing it. But the moment that everyone starts practicing democracy, they no longer want democracy. So just the conclusion of this study that was before Congress in 2015, it says, we are determined to increase public awareness, especially in the inner city and minority communities, about the devastating effects of abortion. Combined with this outreach, our goal is to intensify pressure on the legislative and legal machines to stop this hideous and barbaric act, which continues to ravage Black culture in particular, American society in general. Our pro-life mission is to assist women in crises with alternative answers based in faith, family, and community. So that is the study. I will put it in the chat for you all. I don't know if Dr. Phoenix is still here. I think he said he wanted to come up for 20 minutes. I could do that. I'll just let him talk while I get some water. So let me just put this in the chat for you all. So there is the report from the U.S. Congress. Dr. Phoenix, are you still here? Because if you are, I'm going to send you the link. So I got 30 minutes that I can go for. If there's someone else that want to come on with Dr. Phoenix, just let me know. But I want to definitely get out of here by 2:45 Central Time. So what do you all think about the report, the congressional report on the impact of abortion and its eugenics history? Did most of you guys already know that? Is this new information to you? I'm always curious about that because I don't like to be too redundant with my audience. So, because a lot of this stuff is new to me, you know, this is just a topics that I just never really concerned myself with, man. I really didn't. But now it's critical because we're in a year where everyone wants something from the government and they're being promised all these things, but I don't hear anyone promising Black men anything. Every group out there is getting promised some kind of legislation, some kind of cash payment, some kind of grants, some kind of assistance with the tax dollars that Black men put into. But the only group I'm not hearing specifically targeted for any kind of programs are Native Black American men. And it's because we haven't spoken up as an individual voting bloc because we always saw ourselves fighting for the Black family and the Black people themselves. Come to find out that we was betrayed back in the 70s. We were just too young to understand it. So I see SKC that you want to jump on. I'm going to send you and Dr. Phoenix the link. And I'm just going to limit it to YouTube because I don't have as much time. And if I do more than that, they won't have a chance to speak. So. All right, SKC. Dr. Phoenix, check your email, man. Okay, I see Edward. I'll give Edward the link too. So I have to limit it to Edward, SKC, and Dr. Phoenix because I just don't have enough time to get everyone in. And I don't think that would be fair to you all to bring you on and not let you talk. So I got to limit it to those three. And maybe if you guys want, send me an email if you think that I should do a follow-up panel, like a full, 2-hour panel to discuss the report. After the disintegration panel, you guys let me know, and I definitely be willing to do that. So Edward, I'm gonna go ahead and send that to you right now. Hey, SKC, what up, brother?
Hey, what's going on, King Singer?
Hey, I'm good, man. I thought, I wanted to kind of, talk about this report from the U.S. Congress because, with this whole discussion of the splintering of Black America over the last 60 years, I think that it's critical that we have part of the puzzle that shows us how we got to where we are, where there's like 4 or 5 Black Americans. Because now I'm starting to have a theory that there's actually 5, and I'm gonna talk more about that on Sunday. But there's actually a 5th Black America developing based on the global 4th industrial Black man. And I think that's going to be a new Black America that arises over the next 10 to 20 years. Is like this Black man who is a global citizen and not restricted to America. And so we'll get to that. But I'm going to go ahead and let you and Edward and Dr. Phoenix had a mic. I got to get me some water. So, you got the mic, SKC, and then Edward.
No, I was thinking the same thing with the global man. But, man, this is another document that I would say everyone in the audience, particularly amongst, what we call the Black manosphere, should add to their library of primary documents. Because a lot of times discussions will take place, and Edward knows this, where there'll be these ring around the collar circular debates about this or that without any documentation to prove anything. And it's like from here, it's henceforward. I mean, it's 2020 now. We're in an era of quant and have been for quite some time. So people should have this data readily accessible and be able to say, no, we can go to this CURE document to prove this and that. Here are the references that prove these numbers and so forth. So all of this back and forth with, no, this the white man. No, it's like, come on, we got to get out of that stuff.
Exactly. And that's what they say. I just want to jump in there because the data doesn't matter. Black people are not arguing data-based or logic-based because they're not arguing to understand what's really going on, and then how do you move forward based on what's really going on. They're arguing narratives, they're arguing emotions. So even when you present the data, first thing they're going to say to present the data, then you present the data, then they're asked for a source, then you present the source, then they're going to say it's the white man's source. That's the game they're going to play.
And I think that's why this one is so important, is because this source is from Black people. And when you match it against the source material from what they will call white people, it matches. So it proves 2 things: that 1, that the data is correct, and then 2, that what they call the white man's data is correct as well. So it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, like I said, at the end of the day, you got a lot of dudes. Like what Sigma was talking about is like Black men don't vote as a block. Black men don't think of themselves as a block. All this shit with SYSBM and all of that, that is a very small thing. And even amongst dudes that, let's say, operate like SYSBM individually, but they don't know what SYSBM is, they're not necessarily looking for other Black men to aggregate on some black male first shit. They're looking to aggregate for other Black men that could benefit them, and that's what they should do, like-minded, right? But they're not thinking to the level of, oh, well, Black men need to operate as a block because Black women operate as a block. So when again, like Sigma said, when Black men think of Black people, they don't think of themselves first. They think of Black people. When Black women think of Black people, they think of Black women, Black girls, then the rest of the children, and then Black men are just a means to an end.
Yeah.
And it's been like that for a long time. And nobody never questions that. But when you ask questions to bring that shit up, then what happens is it's kind of like you're bringing people too close to the edge of the matrix, and they start having this code that has them like system reboot in order to never get that far along, because there's certain realities they're going to come down to that they don't want to. And honestly, it's very hard when you see that and really see it, even amongst the men. It really has you thinking like I can either waste my whole life trying to save motherfuckers, or I could just make sure I got my shit on point, and then whatever I do to help somebody is what I do to help somebody. But you got to put yourself first. You got to put like the people that's immediately around you, first after yourself. You can't be worried about everybody because years will go by and you'll be like, "What the fuck happened?" Like you
Can
really
we do
will.
something real quick, Edward? Let me use your mind, and I'm gonna just read some more of the bullet points from page 16 of that report, and then get your thoughts real
Yeah,
quick.
do that because I didn't see when he
Each
was
one.
talking about the report. So yeah,
So
definitely do that.
on page 16, it goes under the whole thought of Black women and abortion. And the first bullet point, it says abortion is the leading cause of death for African Americans, more than all other causes combined, including AIDS, violent crimes, accidents, cancer, and heart disease. What's your thought, Edward?
My thought is black. Number one, that is true. That's statistically true. And number two is feminism has taught women in general, black women in particular, that abortion doesn't count as death. That doesn't count because they were never born in the first place. And this is something if you ask a white woman that as well as a black woman that are feminists, they will support that. This is why you can have a Jamila Lemieux on Ebony talking, lying, saying the leading cause of death for black women is black men, when in actuality, the leading cause of death for black females is black women vis-a-vis abortion. I will also say, and this is my anecdotal evidence, so I'm taking my stuff outside of stats, a lot of women get abortions based on the type of children that they want. So this is something that's not talked about, but women will abort based on gender. And it's not just boys. They will abort girls based on gender too. And actually, I'd argue they do that maybe a little bit more than they do based on boys. That's just my opinion, but that does happen a lot more than what people want to talk about. But yeah, it is
Bullet
the
point
leading
number
cause.
two.
Yeah,
Bullet
go
point
ahead.
number two. In 2008, Black women had abortions at a rate 3.4 times higher than white women.
I can believe that because abortion was set up to target black people as a means of population control, as set up by people like Susan B. Anthony. It's promoted as such as you see. You don't see the same kind. You notice how they always say You notice how they always say the impoverished women don't have access to abortion clinics like wealthy women do. That's because they don't put abortion clinics in poor white zones like West Virginia or shit like that, like they put them in poor black zones. They're talking about white people when they say that because purposely they know a lot of the children are going to be had by the lower classes in general. So they don't want to cut that off because you want to have more white children. So they purposely set it up to where abortion is targeted for black people. They probably would do it for Hispanics as well, but Hispanics Catholic religion kind of stopped them from having abortion as much as they otherwise would.
I'm gonna skip to bullet point number 4 and then come back to 3. Over their lifetime, black women have black women average 1.6 more pregnancies than white women, but are 5 times more likely to have a pregnancy that ends in abortion. Your thoughts, Edward?
That's absolutely true because women are taught black women are taught to use abortion as a form of birth control. If you ask like all women don't really like condoms like that. That is true. But when you ask, if you sit a black woman and a non-black woman down in America and you have them have a conversation about contraceptives, black women will have all these excuses about taking a pill and doing a lot of other shit generally. But when it comes to having abortion, again, that's the contraceptive of choice.
I don't want to dominate. Who's the first person that came up? Is that Dr. Phoenix?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, you go ahead, Dr. Phoenix. You have more input on all of this than
What's going on? That report. I actually mentioned that report back over the summer when King Sigma had a live stream about the Jason Pope situation because the original report that the I believe it was the Government Affairs Accountability Office did it originally. The GAO and originally did a report talking about that because CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, they they did the reporting and what the government, what the GAO had originally used as part of that, as part of their data and their discussion on abortion rates and among Black people was based upon that data that Cure had did over the last 30 plus years or so.
Right. And since you said that, that's what I was saying earlier. That argument of, well, that's the white man's data doesn't make any sense. Here you have two sets of individuals, white and Black, that did the research, and their data matches.
Yeah, the Cure data had been following abortion since I believe it was the early 1970s, 1972 or 73 or something like that. And so they pretty much came to the same conclusions as everyone else. But I think the fundamental problem here is that that gets masked because now some of the discussions around Black women and health tends to be maternal fetal outcomes, meaning adverse outcomes in that regard, meaning that you're having higher rates of Black women dying during and after pregnancy, and also higher rates of infant mortality among Black babies compared to the general population. And what never gets figured into that discussion, because the blame usually goes to racism. In recent months, brothers probably heard.
It does.
Yeah, yeah. They've talked about, Donald Trump is the reason why Black women are overweight, why they have these adverse outcomes during pregnancy and afterwards. But yet, it doesn't talk about the fact that repeated abortions causes damage to the uterus and to the cervix. Because there are very specific types of abortions you can get depending on how many weeks along that the woman is. And so in earlier, if she's a few weeks, so generally if she's anywhere between 1 to 2 months, sometimes at that 3-month process, you can do a medication-induced abortion. So there's various medications they use. But also, if they are a little further along, the one that brothers may have heard about too is the vacuum one, where they use vacuum aspiration. That's usually if they're under 16 weeks. And so if they're under 16 weeks, they get vacuum aspiration. So basically, that one tends to be the one that can cause damage to the uterus, where it can cause uterus scarring, and that in turn can lead to infertility, but also lead to development of uterine fibroids, which can ultimately lead to higher risk of development of breast cancer, cervical cancer, uterine cancer, you name it. And so,
Can I read the data point and get your thoughts, Dr. Phoenix?
Someone in the chat earlier asked, because I had put up a statement saying that typically the data shows that the more educated you are, the less children you tend to have versus the least educated you are. And the major reason for that, at least in my general hypothesis, is that is because generally when you're focused on you're focused on a period of self-development and personal and professional attainment during those periods in your life. So the idea of children really becomes more of a legacy and becomes more of a planned discussion between you and your partner. And so what happens here in Black society, for the most part, is that most pregnancies are unplanned. Hence why you see so many women show up in the latter stages of their pregnancy wanting abortions, because Black women also tend to have more later stage abortions.
That feeds this next data point that says.
I wanted you to clarify that unplanned, because I think we should move beyond calling these pregnancies unplanned, because if you're having sex and you could say irresponsibly had. Because if you have
fuck that unplanned,
and you're not using protection, you're not using the 33 forms of birth control out there. Why do we keep giving people this out of unplanned? Like
they're oops baby, and not even oops baby.
Everyone that has sex without a condom knows that there is a chance that it can reach that egg. So why is it unplanned? It's called not being responsible.
Well, I have to say this, given what I do, I have to say this because, clinically, this is the term we use. We just say unplanned pregnancy. But, just more of a, just in my personal life, I would just say
social term.
I mean, these are your oops babies. We know that Black children most of the time are born to people who were, let's just be frank about this, who were just really playing around. They were messing around. You know,
What's interesting about what you just said is I completely understand and respect that that's a clinical term, but that's why there's importance of having political terms, social terms, because a clinical term is not meant to be portrayed as like a political or social term. What they'll do is they'll take that clinical term because it's official and try to make the clinical term and make it a political term. That way, if you operate outside of that, you get the Snoop Dogg treatment, and that's you're attacking black women because really it's unplanned. When in actuality, there's a lot more context to that than that. So anyway, yeah.
No, and that's a good point, which is why, some of this, when I am on panels over at the Black Brain Trust, some of the discussions I do talk about black men, having more black men involved in healthcare, being healthcare providers and getting involved in research, because this is what happens. The black female academics, they the ones that take these terms that we use in clinical settings and they apply it across the social spectrum.
Yep.
So instead of something that being used, instead of a term that we use in a clinical setting, now it becomes this broad term that gets used in terms of this greater discussion around black women and health and maternal fetal outcomes. And this is why you need an entire brigade of black men who are scientists and healthcare providers that can be able to provide these services.
And another quick point I want,
this is why at the root of the issue, when you have such a breakdown of the black family, we start talking about things like we need more health providers, we need more scientists. You can't get scientists and health providers if you can't get children that can read at their age level. Okay? So we all know what we could get, but if you don't make the investment in the black boys, even the black girls, they say they're making the investment, but they still ain't making the investment that they claim they are. But we know that they're not investing in black boys. I'm looking at the data showing that African emerging group that I talked about, the emergent foreign black group, they come over here, even if they don't speak any English, and they invest in their children. I'm reading stories about people that come from Africa, the Caribbean, and these other countries, and they might end up having to be like a parking attendant. But you know what? They're investing in their boys and girls.
And they don't have this problem like we do either. So they're not going to see it the same way we're going to see it, because that issue is a cultural issue.
But black America have already cleared the field for them because we've already made all the gains. We've already fought all the oppression. So when they come in, it's a cleared forest. And because they're prepared for what is already there, they don't have the baggage that a lot of these black Americans have. So that's why they're clearing the field.
And I just wanted to put this point out here too. It's a lot more insidious than what even the doctor was saying for this, or professor, for this reason. He's talking about black female outcomes for black female health and black female vibrancy. The reality is you have these academics, which are women. You have the polished political class, which are women. They don't give a fuck about that when it comes to black women. They only care about the narrative. So even though these outcomes lead to negative outcomes for black women, like this ignorance, this willful ignorance, like what we were talking about with manipulating the terms, that harms men, but that also harms women actually more so. This is where they come back to the circular argument of the poverty equals racism. That's where the negative outcome for women they try to portray with. This is how you know they don't really care about female outcomes. They only care about what that dominant society tells them to care about. So they will only go as far as that is what the dominant society allows them to do to get what they want to get. And this is true for the medical field, the academia field, because at the end of the day, all those fields, no matter how black they are, they still work for the white man at the end of the day. And they won't go as far as where the white man will allow them to go. This is why when you say the stuff you say, doctor, and other black male academics try to dig into the data for real, what happens is they start to get cast out or they gotta leave because they're operating outside of white supremacy at that point. And the women buy into that, and even to their own detriment. And that's what people don't understand. It's not about just the women versus the men. The women will destroy the women in order to fulfill that program.
Your mic is rubbing up against your collar, I think. Your mic.
Oh, my bad. Well, my point is the women will destroy the other women in order to fulfill the paradigm of what white supremacy is, because they will never talk about anything that is not allowed to talk about, even when it hurts them. Because what he was talking about was things that created negative outcomes for Black women. So you would think that Black scientists and Black academics would be honest about that enough to at least give Black women outcomes. They don't do that. They pawn it off to poverty and by proxy racism. So that really doesn't go anywhere. Those are bridge to nowhere conversations.
They got to keep the lie alive. But but bullet point number 7, man, I thought again is just interesting because this is 10 years old. Approximately 360,000 preborn Black babies are aborted every year, nearly 1,000 per day. Dr. Phoenix.
Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you.
No, that's SKC. Can you repeat that one more time?
It says approximately 360,000 Black babies are aborted every year, nearly 1,000 per day. And this was 10 years ago.
Well, keep in mind there was actually a report that came out of New York about 5-6 years ago that talked about the Black population growth rate was negative in New York.
Yeah, I have that one.
Because the abortion rates exceeded the live births.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and right now, if you're looking at what's going on in your major cities, if you look at your 3 major cities, so Chicago, LA, New York, these are your cities that tend to, well, LA at one point did have a fairly sizable Black population, but New York and Chicago, for example, have very sizable Black populations. However, Chicago, for example, has been experiencing a negative growth population compared to other groups. And for a number of reasons. One, people are leaving because just the cost of living in Chicago. But also, two, when you factor in the fact that if you look at your major centers where you have a big population of Black people, you also see this is where you tend to see your highest numbers of abortions among Black women, where you have a significant numbers of Black people that are centralized. And so when you consider that the case, I'm not the least bit surprised, because again, you got part of the abortion thing that also gets considered. If you have an abortion, women can have what is known as spontaneous abortions beyond 6 months of pregnancy, and that is called stillbirth. And so you hear this, if you guys dig into this, you'll hear this is actually a fairly major issue among Black women. Because again, part of what happens is that, you guys all know this, and just sort of anecdotally in your lives, you probably know women who have had multiple abortions. And so because they had multiple abortions, as I was saying earlier, that creates the potential of uterine scarring. And because you have uterine scarring, that makes it less likely that they can sustain a viable pregnancy, meaning that you can have a fetus that grows from the fetus to a full-term neonate in about 39, 40 weeks. That is considered full-term. Now, if you have something, anything before that is considered preterm. So whether that's 37 weeks or 38 weeks or whatever the case, is all considered preterm. And so for many women, many Black women, for example, one of the fundamental problems too is that they're not, because I think King Sigma mentioned earlier about all these nonprofits. Access to prenatal care is still a major problem for Black females.
Yeah, because that's not what the goal is. They're gonna let you abort motherfuckers all day, every day. And see, this is what Planned Parenthood won't talk about. Whenever they want to talk about, the Republicans want to target them for their abortion stuff for funding, they always talk about all this other access that they provide. No, the fuck they don't. Not like they may do it, but they don't do it with certain groups. I could drive by the Planned Parenthood thing right now, in the local area. I could tell you right now, man, all those services are not distributed in the same way everywhere, and that's what they don't talk about, because that's where everybody's in on it. Another thing too is, this is another reason why all these women that talk about hoe phases and stuff like that, when they sit here and then later on in life, because you got to understand, if you're in your 30s, that's not the prime time to try to have a kid either. So not only are you in your 30s, then probably you've had like abortions in your past. And let's keep it real. People be thinking, oh, well, these women have one abortion. No, I know motherfuckers have had like 5 or 6 abortions. And they'll say it like it ain't even nothing, ain't even a problem. And I live in the South. Like, so
to go along with what you said, I'm gonna just read this last selection before I get out of here. It says this is on page 10 of the report that King Sigma had. It says abortion often creates a relationship conflict between the man and woman, attacking the traditional family model. In fact, the abortion industry has taken great care to promote ideas that clash with traditional family structure and ideology by celebrating a lifestyle that promotes moral decay, promiscuity, and abortion as birth control.
Well, and that's a great point.
Well, can I say this one quick thing? Like, it's interesting. Art has, shout out to Art, has his own channels, right? And last night, like a woman, it was last night, night before, a woman came on there. And this is some random female that came up here. I guess they're stumbling in a manosphere, black chick. And she had this shirt on called My Body, My Choice. And she was sounding goofy. I got to pull a clip out. But she's young. So it was amazing how just deeply programmed she was into these attitudes. And what a lot of people don't tell you, it's not just the academia that does the programming. They solidify it, but it's actually the women that does the programming at an early age. So when you hear a lot of these females, they stumble on in the manosphere, especially the young ones, who are they always referencing when it seems to what they got? They're always referencing the women in their family. So they do the initial imprinting of a lot of these ideologies to the point where they don't even understand it to even be an issue, even for their own health. Anyway, I just want to put that out there.
No, and that's a great point, because again, if you go back and consider the fact that SKC was right what he said. 30s is not a period where women should be considering having children. Ideally, you should be having children somewhere in your mid-late 20s. Ideally, However, it's not uncommon, obviously, for women to be having children in their 30s and beyond. But basically, once you get beyond the age of 35, the risk for adverse, effects during, adverse events during pregnancy does double for the most part. However, one of the things that brothers can do is that if you really want to make these women squirm, ask them about going to get getting a pelvic exam and see how they start acting with you all. If you guys suspect that they may have had an abortion or multiple abortions, because again, I think the fundamental problem with what SKC was saying with that point